latest, an unfinished love story, a history of the 60s.
Project, saying it's not clear what benefit it will provide since Israel keeps the borders closed, preventing aid trucks from getting in. NPR's Jane Aref has more.
Israel says it needs to restrict the crossings to prevent Hamas from bringing weapons in, but aid officials say malnutrition and disease are now rampant. Aid officials operating in Gaza this week gave an unvarnished view of the pier. One at a press briefing called the pier a joke.
NPR's Jane Aref reporting a merchant ship loaded with food is now headed to the pier. The University of Southern California hosted a ticketed event last night at the LA Memorial Coliseum, an alternative after the university canceled its main stage graduation ceremony. Yusra Farzan from member station LAist has more.
USC's class of 2024 was treated to sold-out Travis Scott merchandise, a fireworks display, performances by the Trojan Marching Band, and a drone show. Minaz Fazal's sons missed out on a high school graduation celebration in 2020 because of the pandemic. But what they got instead was better, she said.
As much as they were disappointed that they didn't get a high school graduation, the alternatives that we ended up having were a lot more fun.
The main stage ceremony was cancelled after over 90 people were arrested in connection to an anti-Gaza war encampment demanding divestment from Israel. For NPR News, I'm Yusra Farzan in Los Angeles.
Federal immigration authorities have proposed a rules change that would make it harder for some people to claim asylum in the U.S. NPR's Steve Inskeep reports the Homeland Security Secretary's proposal would apply to people who cross into the U.S. illegally instead of at a regular border crossing.
Alejandro Mayorkas spoke with NPR before the announcement of the rules change, but it fits into a broader strategy. People from around the world are seeking asylum, which Mayorkas wants them to do legally.
We're trying to incentivize lawful pathways and disincentivize illegal crossings.
Is it fair to say that this isn't working, given the sheer numbers of people who've continued to come to the southern border?
No, it is not.
You think it's working?
I think it is working.
What's the evidence?
And, well, Steve, the numbers have decreased.
Migration numbers peaked last December and have declined through the winter. Steve Inskeep, NPR News.
A federal appeals court today upheld the criminal contempt of Congress conviction of former Trump White House senior advisor Steve Bannon for defying a subpoena over the deadly January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Wall Street's trading in mixed territory. You're listening to NPR News.
And from the GBH Radio Newsroom in Boston, I'm Judy Ewell. The pro-Palestinian student encampment at MIT has been cleared away. MIT and state police were sent in early this morning in riot gear to remove students, taking some into custody. School workers removed tables, tents, large pro-Palestinian signs from the lawn, along with dozens of Israeli flags in the grass near the encampment. Student protester and grad worker Mohammed says the protest was peaceful. He says the university's response was embarrassing.
Nobody really thinks that college students warrant hundreds of riot gear officers descending onto their campus 4 a.m. in the morning in an ambush orchestrated by the administrations. But what it does show is that MIT is willing to commit violence not only in Gaza with its killer drones program, but also here on campus.
MIT's president, Sally Kornbluth, says it's her responsibility to make sure the campus is safe and functioning for everyone, and they could not allow the encampment to persist. Campus protesters continue to call for MIT to stop research related to Israel's Ministry of Defense. It's not every night you get to see the northern lights in New England. Meteorologists say intense geomagnetic storms make that possible late tonight into tomorrow's early morning hours. They say much depends on whether tonight's cloud cover breaks up a bit, possibly leaving enough space to see the lights, and it helps if you're away from electric light pollution. In sports, the Bruins host the Panthers in Game 3 tonight. The Sox host the Washington Nationals. Sun and clouds today, highs in the 50s. Clouds tonight, lows in the 40s. Showers then partly sunny tomorrow, highs again in the 50s. It's 53 in Boston.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include TimberTech, transforming landfill-bound waste into sustainable PVC and composite outdoor decking products designed to look like real wood. More at timbertech.com. Everything wood should be.
And for more original reporting, visit gbhnews.org.
Here's
Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Yeakin. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library. Thank you. And we are streaming on youtube.com/GBH News. The great historian Doris Kearns Goodwin is going to join us around 12:30 today to talk about her great new book as well as some current events. And singer-songwriter Rufus Wainwright will be with us on Monday, and the Attorney General will be here when we're back at the library on Tuesday. Andrea Campbell will join us Tuesday the 28th from 11 to 12. Good morning, Jim.
I was walking around the crowd earlier this morning. People were whispering like, when's Doris coming?
Yeah, well, she's like zoomed to the top of the New York Times and Washington Post bestseller list. I mean, she's right up there like a minute after her book was published.
Book is
so
spectacular.
It's fantastic. It makes me very nostalgic for a very different time.
Well, maybe the time will return. Starting the show, though, we want to talk about what commencements mean and have meant in your life and what you think this year's will mean to you and others. Our number is 877-301-8970. You can call or text that number. The class of 2024, high schoolers and college graduates, studied their way through massive upheavals during COVID and obviously now campus protests over the war in Gaza. Columbia has canceled its main commencement program amid campus protests there. Some speakers have backed out of their commencement speech commitments for the same reason, like the one at UMass Amherst. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm sure you know that MIT sent in the state police this morning at 4 a.m. to clear nonviolent encampments. So the lines are open. We want to ask if this year's commencement is taking on a different meaning than in past years for you, whether you're graduating or have a graduate in your family. Do you remember the day you walked across the aisle with your classmates? The number is 877-301-8970. Do you remember the day you walked across the aisle with your classmates?
Oh, I do. I don't remember.
Why are you laughing?
I don't remember as much mine, but I remember my sisters.
Oh, I remember your sisters.
My older sister graduated from Smith College.
Yep.
Gloria Steinem was the commencement speaker, and this was like in the early 70s, you know, when we were all kind of still, you had to wear skirts to school, you couldn't wear slacks and stuff like that. Gloria Steinem shows up, she's got this micro mini skirt on, really short, she's got the big glasses, she's got the long hair, she looks like a very sexy intellectual, and she comes out on the stage, and I'm with my staid father, mother, you know, the maiden aunts, school teachers, the maiden lady aunts. She starts talking about sex.
No, that isn't what she started talking about. Orgasms.
That's right.
Told me this story. How did your father take it?
Yeah, it was wild. All the parents are looking at the floor. The kids are looking at the floor, and Gloria Steinem gave a great. I mean, it was a life-changing speech. Listening to her, let me tell you.
So,
anyway,
do you remember yours or you don't?
do you remember yours?
Well, actually, not only do I not remember mine, I don't remember even the year, but I looked it up this morning online. And so the more I looked, I figured who sang, who spoke, or whatever, it would refresh my recollection. I'm 90% sure I went, but I remember nothing. Do you remember yours?
I do. I graduated. I went to Stanford in California. It was very hot. The sun was blazing down. It was really hot. That's what I remember about it.
Who spoke, like Calvin Coolidge or something? Who was
somebody that had to do with housing and urban development. I think Carla Hills.
Oh, she was the secretary of
She was secretary.
HUD.
She was hard. She wasn't Gloria Steinem, I'll tell you that.
How do you feel about, before you get to that, how do you feel about Columbia canceling their commencement? I think it's reprehensible, frankly.
Well, I guess they're going to have little small ceremonies, but they're not going to have the major ceremonies. You said at the beginning, the kids miss their high school graduation because of the pandemic
COVID,
the same year. I remember in Brookline, the kids drove by in their cars, and the principal stood there with their diplomas and handed it through the window. There was nothing. So the kids at Columbia are going to go through that again. I guess they're going to have little smaller things. I think it's really unfortunate that Colson Whitehead has canceled his commencement at UMass Amherst because he is this genius, Pulitzer Prize winner. He wrote The Underground Railroad, which is a great book, The Nickel Boys, Sag Harbor, this coming-of-age novel. I think that would have been a wonderful moment to hear him speak. Sometimes there are people at graduations, that people really remember.
He spoke because of the arrests out there, but he canceled because of the arrests of students.
Out there. That's right. I think we could all, too bad we couldn't have been in 2022 at NYU's commencement speech, because you know who spoke then?
I do not.
Taylor Swift.
She did?
The queen of holding grudges gave some surprising advice. We have some sound of this, telling students to catch and release. Here's Taylor.
You can't carry all things, all grudges, all updates on your ex, all enviable promotions your school bully got at the hedge fund his uncle started. Decide what is yours to hold and let the rest go.
What does she mean that you can't carry all grudges? Why can't you?
Mr. Redmond, talking to you, Jim.
Central theme of
but
my
I thought
life.
that was great. I mean, that's useful advice if you're 18 or 20, maybe 21 years old by then. All updates on your ex. You don't want to be trolling your ex needlessly and wasting your time online doing that. I thought it was very good advice. Don't carry all grudges, Jim. I don't think it's done a lot of good.
I think it's a little late for this old dog to be changing whatever. 877-301-8970. And by the way, if we can work into the conversation, I based on what I know, and I wasn't there, even though I live a half mile away, the fact that the president of MIT, right before commencement, thought it was appropriate to send in the state police in riot gear at 4 a.m. to arrest non-violent protesters. What kind of message does that send around graduation time about speech on campuses? I repeat, non-violent protesters. People should remember, by the way, she was one of the 3 presidents, the only one to survive, actually, along with the president of Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, who testified in those first hearings with the odious House members on the House Education Committee.
Listen, this is from Aaron in Hopkinton. Inspiring at the time, not so great in retrospect. My commencement speakers were Ben Carson. People may remember he ran for president of the United States.
I do indeed.
And Bill Cosby did not age well.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's what we all thought. Bill Cosby was really great. And somebody else just texted to say their graduation speech from BU was canceled in 1970, a long time ago, due to riots over Vietnam. And there were a lot of graduations canceled then. I mean, in fact, a lot of colleges closed down altogether and sent the kids home and canceled final exams and everything else because of the unrest on campuses over Vietnam. Let's start with Dave in Ipswich. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Dave.
I couldn't care less about being at my college commencement, UMass Amherst. It's 2.5 hours away. Even the people I'd commute with, sometimes weekends, go back and forth home, that none of them wanted to go or did go. They just sit home, wait for your the piece of paper that comes in the mail that says, okay, you have the degree. Who wants to be with 10,000 other people in that heat? And I never wanted to see, I never did, I never have been back to the campus since.
Can I tell you, Dave, it is so wonderful to start the show with such a happy guy. It really, the sun's out, Dave's on the phone. No, I understand. By the way, I have a lot of friends who feel the exact same. I don't even remember it, so I shouldn't criticize. What's that, Dave?
Time.
What's that?
Well, different time.
Different time, that's right, okay.
We weren't brought up with participation trophies, etc.
Okay, fine. All right, Dave, you're giving me a headache. Thank you very much, though. It's an excellent call. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970.
Listen to this from Jen in Littleton. Her college graduation speaker was Fred Rogers.
Well,
Mr. Rogers.
How much would you love that?
Yes. I mean, I think that would have been wonderful. 877-301-8970. Rosie in Rhode Island, thank you for calling.
Hi, Rosie.
Hi there. Good morning.
And to you.
I'm going to turn that attitude right around.
Oh, beautiful. Go ahead.
I did graduate from college a good 35 years ago. So I don't remember all the details, but the part that's important to me was to have done it for my parents. My parents are immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. And for them to kind of witness the fact that this is the reason that they came to America, left their family behind, was to provide their kids a better future. And
that's pretty beautiful.
Got to see that, and I was so happy for them.
That's actually pretty beautiful. Rosie, that's a great call. That's a great call. I'm glad you shared it with us. Thanks so much. 877-301-8970 is the number. Can we do another nice little excerpt?
Yes.
This is the late Chadwick Boseman. It's particularly timely now. He's speaking to Howard University graduation class in 2018, where he's praising the students there who had just protested the school's policies related to housing and campus policing.
I didn't come here to take sides. My interest is what's best for the school. A Howard University education is not just about what happens in the classroom, students. In some ways, what you were able to do exemplifies some of the skills you learned in the classroom. It takes the education out of the realm of theory and into utility and practice.
I couldn't agree more. 877-301-8970.
Listen to this. My commencement speaker was Doris Kearns Goodwin.
No.
Yep.
Where
this
and
is
when?
Danielle from Bates College in 1998. Danielle's from Braintree. She was at Bates College in 1998. It's a great school up in Lewiston, Maine. And somebody else said, at Harvard, schools all march into the yard but receive diplomas in their houses. And Doris Kearns Goodwin gave out diplomas for some of the
that's pretty
classes
great.
while there. So I guess Doris Kearns Goodwin, well, not surprising. I mean, wouldn't you invite her to every graduation if you could?
I would. What did they do when my kid graduated from Smith? We didn't have
Gloria Steinem. That's too bad.
What's that white flag? What do they do with the white thing where they dress in white?
They
carry some white thing?
they all get in white dresses and they roll
it's
this
pretty-
wheel.
Oh, that's
down
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Down
What's the significance of that? I can't remember.
It's some virginal dance that they
It
do
is
before
virginal
graduation
dance?
or something before they go off.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, to marry. Those were the days, Jim. Those were the days.
Yeah.
Alexander from Duxbury, thank you for
And
calling.
then actually, what they do the next day, which is actually quite beautiful,
What?
they do a non-virginal dance, which really is
That's right. They
so
celebrated
moving.
their graduation.
Exactly.
They're
and
no
then
longer
they move
virgins.
on.
That's
right.
right.
Okay, fine.
Alexander from Duxbury,
Hello,
thank you for calling.
Alexander. Hi.
So my story is 1968. We were graduating from Western University. I was the president of my class. We had
Wow.
Leonard Bernstein,
Oh,
commencement speaker. The president of the college came to me and he said, "We've got a problem. Bernstein doesn't want to come." And I said, "Well, he's got to come." He was very upset because he was so close to Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King. You all know what we were going through in 1968. And then tell Leonard Bernstein he's got to come. We're all in this together. Hear from him. He did come in a gorgeous white suit, delivered a fantastic address, and was very happy to be there. We were very happy to have him.
that's a pretty great
Yeah.
story, Alexander.
What school
Thanks.
was this?
This was Wesleyan.
Wesleyan. Oh, okay.
Alexander, thanks for the call. By the way,
Yeah.
it was those murders that in part caused this project between Dick Goodwin and Doris Kearns Goodwin not to happen earlier because of the ending of the idealism of the 60s. But
Yeah.
she'll talk to us about that when she
Yeah, I mean,
joins
there's
us
a
about
million
12:30.
incredible stories in this book. I mean, it's a keeper. An Unfinished Love Story is the name, and I understand why it's on the top of the bestsellers.
Can we go to another? There's a lot of talk about this speech that's gone viral at Ohio State. This guy, Chris Pan, who's this entrepreneur, gave this commencement address at Ohio State. And again, I think he was booed. Was he booed off the stage? I think he was booed off the stage, which doesn't happen that often at commencements. Here's the beginning of Chris Pan's commencement, I assume last week or the week before. Here it is.
I'd like to get started by moving our energy, getting our energy flowing. So if you're able to, please stand and follow my movement. Take a deep breath, get real high, and scream at the top of my lungs. One more time, a little louder.
That is beautiful. That is really a very inspirational.
They didn't like him. We have some. Listen to this. Rosemary from Lowell says she had Bill Clinton, 1993 at Northeastern, but the student speaker upstaged Bill Clinton, which is not easy to do, singing a beautiful rendition of Hallelujah. I guess the Leonard Cohen Hallelujah or the Hallelujah.
Oh, Leonard Cohen. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. By the way,
Listen to this one. Dizzy Gillespie.
you know who also sings Hallelujah? Rufus Wainwright, who's going to be with us on Monday,
that's
and
right.
does a beautiful version of Hallelujah. But good.
We had Carl from Melrose. His undergraduate speaker was Dizzy Gillespie, and graduate school was Lee Iacocca.
Well, that's
Remember
pretty
Lee
good.
Iacocca
Chrysler, yeah.
From Chrysler.
You know, before we leave the Clintons, though, and then we got to take a break, and we'll continue this thing, I don't want to get aggravated. What did you think of what Hillary Clinton had to say on MSNBC about student protesters? What was your reaction to this comment of
Hillary
hers?
Clinton?
Hillary
I
Clinton.
thought it was terrible.
Can you share with people what she had to say?
Yes, and you've heard this a lot. She's not the first person to say it, but she shouldn't have said it either. She criticized these campus protesters, saying young people, quote, don't know very much, unquote, about the history of the Middle East. And then she went on to say, and it was true, that her husband, when he was president, Bill Clinton, was trying to negotiate this deal with the Palestinians and the Israelis for a peace accord. And she pointed out, and that is true, that Yasser Arafat didn't want to go with the deal. But the fact that Yasser Arafat didn't want to go with the deal has nothing to do with what's going on. What is this, 30 years later?
First of all, two things. One, how does she know they don't
Well, she
know
doesn't
the history?
know. She doesn't
and
know.
two, let's assume for argument's sake they don't know the history. Does that mean they're not entitled to stand up and protest the killing of tens of thousands of people? What is her point?
Well, it's a point that you hear from a lot of older people. I mean, I'm an older person too. I'm not as old as she is, but I'm an older person saying that these young people don't know what they're talking about. Really? I think they maybe have...
To what end? I mean, what do you achieve by saying that?
To undercut the legitimacy of the protests. I think that's what it's about.
Okay.
And I think it's a stupid thing to say, because how does she know what they know or don't know? I would guarantee that a lot of the kids that are out there protesting know exactly what the situation is. They know the history back in 1948. They certainly know about the tragedy of the Holocaust. They know about the tragedy of October 7th, and they know about what's going on in Gaza now. I think that they do know what they're talking about. Anyway, Ken from Fitchburg, thank you for calling.
Hello, Ken.
Oh, hi. Good afternoon. Interesting comments. I just don't agree with your comments made earlier about the MIT arrests being unnecessary. When you show up at a university and you protest and you're told not to be there by MIT police, that if you go there, you'll be arrested. It doesn't matter if you are protesting for what you think is a right or wrong cause. You know, MIT is a university, and even if you go there and you're told not to go there, and if you're going to be arrested, then you bring it on yourself. I don't think they got arrested for any reason but being told they just don't want them there.
Yeah, I guess my point, Ken, is I would prefer a university president not to tell them that they're going to be arrested if they don't leave there, if they were nonviolent. If they have a point of view and they care enough to do what they're doing, I think it was totally unnecessary. And the notion that even if you are right, that state police at 4 a.m. come in riot gear, to me, is an overreaction of epic proportions. So we will agree to disagree, an expression I hate, by the way. Why did I say that? I respect your opinion. Ken, thank you very much for the call.
My graduation featured Jared Bowen and the
and
artist
Emerson?
Steve Locke. I was so proud
Whoa.
and happy. No, Mass Art.
Wow.
Jay from Mass Art, which is a great school. Listen to this. This person may capture the mood of a lot of our graduations. I had the pleasure of sitting outside in pouring rain at my Boston College commencement, listening to some random, no-name politician from the Pennsylvania State Legislature.
How's that possible?
My roommate sat next to me and slept through the entire thing.
Did you ever give a commencement address? I don't think I ever asked you.
No, you have.
I did.
Yes.
That was a sorry story.
La-di-da,
No,
la-di-da.
no, you don't remember the story, do you?
I think somebody canceled.
Does everybody read the Globe? I
They
assume
called you.
the week of commencement speeches, when they have a list of who's giving commencement speeches at all the colleges. Well, a bunch of years ago, I gave the commencement speech at Fisher College, which is right around the corner. And here's the quote from the president of Fisher College. This is almost verbatim in the Boston Globe when they mentioned that I am giving the commencement speech. Quote, "We attempted to get Scott Brown, but he was unavailable." That is so heartwarming.
Well,
That was really beautiful endorsement of my...
Well, take it for,
Can you also clean up when you're done, Jim? Is that possible?
They wanted to get another handsome guy, Jim.
Oh,
And
that's
Scott
really...
Brown is a handsome guy. Okay.
We're taking a break.
My
Margaret.
graduation speaker was Mayor
Or not.
Mumbles Menino. Need
That's
I
not nice.
say
That's
more?
really not nice. I mean, that's really...
Yeah,
that's not nice.
Northeastern 1991. Barbara Bush. She gave the commencement speech at Wellesley, and a lot of the women at Wellesley were protesting
remember that.
she came to give the speech because she had chosen to raise her children as opposed to being a career woman. But I think
It wasn't about the policies of W?
I think it had a lot to do with she was not
Oh, really? I
symbolizing
didn't know
the
that.
women.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I think, but she spoke anyway. I remember going there, and she
Break.
was great. Anyway, we were taking a break,
That
and
is
then we'll
correct.
get back with some more famous graduation
okay.
speakers. But we're talking about this because
Do you want
it
to hear
is-
excerpts from mine at any point? Or...
Absolutely.
Hi, I am not Scott Brown. Welcome to the commencement.
We're talking about, it's graduation season. We're talking about kind of a sad circumstance where colleges around the country are not going to have a graduation because of the protests on campus. And we're also talking about your own graduations, whether you remember it and whether you had somebody neat speak at your graduation. 877-301-8970 is the number. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Not all glaciers are melting away. Water evaporating from Pakistan's farmland is turning into snow in the mountains of Tajikistan, and it's causing some glaciers there to grow.
It's a total pain to walk around on, but they look a little bit exotic even to a glaciologist.
That story and more global news next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and Mass Cultural Council, an independent state agency committed to supporting the vibrant creative and cultural sector of Massachusetts. Learn more at massculturalcouncil.org. And the Boston Speakers Series, announcing its upcoming season at Symphony Hall for 7 evenings, featuring Liz Cheney, Andrew Lloyd Webber, news anchor Chris Wallace, and artificial intelligence entrepreneur Oren Etzioni. bostonspeakers.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. We are live at the Boston Public Library. I should say there's quite anticipation of Doris Kearns Goodwin joining us at about 12:30 today. We're pretty excited too. And by the way, if you haven't read this book, it's called An Unfinished Love Story, A Personal History of the 60s. It is both beautiful and powerful and really important, I would argue, for right now. If you're joining us, and Rufus Wainwright, the great singer-songwriter, is joining us on Monday. The Attorney General will be with us at the library on the 28th. Marjorie's obviously having a problem here. And this is really hard to do, Marjorie. If you're just joining us, well, who cares if you're just joining us? Our number is 877-301-8097. What are you
Well, we have a few good texts.
Okay, let's hear them.
This is from an anonymous texter. I am a Fisher College grad. That's where Jim Browdy spoke. And I do remember Jim's inspiring speech about following your dreams of daylight saving time, what weird things you could do with Q-tips, and other old Boston Public Radio chestnuts. That was a good one.
He loved it at the time. That's all I can tell you.
Listen to this. This is Sandy from Westport. I graduated in 1994 from Roger Williams University. Our speaker was Ed, did you say it, Coach? Koch.
No, Koch. The mayor of New York, Ed Koch.
The mayor of New York, Ed Koch. He had just lost re-election as mayor of New York City. I'll never forget, he started his speech by saying, "The people of New York have spoken, and the people will be punished." And Sandy
I don't think he ever did lose the mayor. I think he lost the governorship to Cuomo. I'm not sure.
Well, whatever he lost.
Okay.
He said that, and she says that's exactly how I felt in 2016. And then Bill from Bridgewater says, the only way I will go to another graduation ceremony is if Stormy Daniels is the commencement speaker. And by the way, Stormy Daniels gave as good as she got to the defense attorney that was trying to defend Donald Trump, the lawyer that was questioning her about lying, and she gave it right back in a pretty decisive way. Chris in Boston, thank you for calling.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Jim, Marjorie. So good to hear from you all.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.
You too.
And I'm just calling as a 50-something-year-old Boston resident who is finally getting his college diploma, and I'm graduating from UMass Boston in about 2 weeks.
That is fabulous, by the way. Congratulations, Chris. That is really great.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead. Great.
And I am marching in my commencement, which I'm going to be honest, I didn't want to do, but my wife basically bullied me into doing it. I'm glad she did.
That's great.
And it's just kind of exciting. I don't even know who the commencement speaker is. I don't care. I hope it's Marjorie, but if it's not, that's fine.
I've not been invited, Chris.
Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, I'd settle for you because I'd love to know what to do else with Q-tips besides stick them in my ears.
Okay,
so
fine.
That's what I got.
Don't go away. I'm happy to share that with you, even if I'm not your commencement speaker. Why'd you go back to school, Chris?
It's kind of a second chapter. You know, I kind of blew up a scholarship when I was a kid, and I moved out here to Boston and started a life and did a lot of awesome things, and I am getting my art degree because I've always loved art, and I'm going to be a landscape painter. That's my dream. That's my goal.
In all seriousness, big-time congratulations. We're thrilled you called, and it's great, and your wife is right. Show up. That's totally great, Chris. Good luck to you. Thanks so much. 877-301-8970.
I remember my high school graduation 20 years ago at the DCU Center in Worcester, skipped college graduation in 2019, but out of all the graduations I've been to, my cousins from George Washington University back in 2014 was the most memorable. Jose Andres.
Oh, wow.
And he is the great chef who goes
World
around
Central Kitchen.
to give food to people in disasters, including he tried to give food to the people in Gaza, and his workers were killed.
They're back, by the way. Do you know, despite that, they are back in action, attempting to provide critical needs, food.
And by the way,
to
he said when
people.
Andres gave the commencement at George Washington, the National Mall. No, George Washington is in St. Louis. Must be a
No,
different
it's not.
school.
George Washington's in
It
D.C.
is?
Washington University is in St.
Okay,
Louis.
thank you.
yeah.
Because he said the National Mall and the Washington Monument were in the background. So
That's pretty great.
Thank you for that. Ed in Nantasket Beach. What do you think, Ed?
Hello, Ed.
Good morning to both of you. Second-time caller.
Thank you.
Stop picking on Marjorie, would you please?
I can't. It's like a DNA kind of thing. I just can't.
He just can't help himself.
I try, and I just can't.
He's been warned and warned, Ed.
I have, by people in great positions of power. Go ahead. I'll try.
Right. I gave a commencement speech to a Montessori middle school.
Good for you.
And?
I said, listen, I've been to 3 commencements in my life. I don't remember who spoke. I don't remember what they said. I'll do my best. I've learned 4 things. Sensible shoes. Wear them. Sunscreen. Wear it. Good posture. Do your best. And floss.
Now wait a minute, Ed.
I think you stole that from that person.
I think you stole it from the columnist.
University of Chicago, was that,
from
or something?
Chicago. She's the one that talked about the floss and the
Who
dental
did that?
floss.
Who gave that speech?
It was a columnist for the newspaper out there.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ed?
I was at a stoplight. I missed it.
Ed, thank you for the call. We appreciate it.
that was one of the great.
What was her name? Can you check that out,
Yeah,
Jamie?
she was.
It's a very famous.
I think she was a
commencement speech.
columnist for one of the Chicago papers, and she gave a speech, and she said, "Wear sunscreen and floss." Yeah, those were great ideas.
877-301-8970 is the number.
John in Rhode Island, thank you for calling.
Hello, John.
Hi, guys. I went to Providence College, and I graduated in 1888.
Did you say 1888?
No, he did not. Oh, he did? Okay.
No.
1988.
No, 1988. That was
Got it. Okay.
1988.
Oh, okay.
And our speaker was Connie Chung, who was the first solo primetime anchor for a major news show on CBS. And she had just married, what's his name?
Maury Povich, isn't she?
Yeah,
She
she
married
married Maury
Povich.
Povich, that's right.
Yeah.
She just married Maury Povich. And the funny thing was, in '88, it was very contrary to what people were talking about. Well, women, you're supposed to go out and have a career and have a family and have it all and stuff. Her message was basically, you can't have it all. And don't marry your career because it won't ever love you back.
Well, that's pretty good advice
Talking
there.
about more career balance stuff. Yeah, it was the first time I ever heard that.
John, thank you.
And it's what-
I'm sorry.
and one other thing. One
Yeah,
other real
sure.
quick thing.
Sure.
I just want to say, and in terms of all these older people saying that younger people don't know what's going on, they all seem to forget that most of the early leaders of Israel before 1948 were actually terrorists doing bombings of, hotels and all kinds of stuff. So they need to get on, the old people need to get on Google and learn the pre-1948
Well, people may
history.
challenge some of that too, but thank you, John, for the call. Mary Smitch, S-C-H-M-I-C-H, thank you, Jamie, was the Chicago columnist who gave that speech that
it was
Marjorie and I were
a
talking.
great
You know,
speech.
it's another speech. It's not unlike, well, it's sort of unlike Connie Chung's. We talked about it the other day. Speaking of legendary historians from Massachusetts, in addition to Doris, David McCullough, one of our favorite guests ever, late David McCullough, his son gave that speech that went viral.
At Wellesley
to
High
his,
School.
Was it Wellesley High
I'm
School?
pretty sure.
In which the basic theme was "You're not special," right?
Yeah, he took a lot of grief.
He took a lot of grief.
Over that, but I thought it was really.
I thought it was great,
really
actually.
good.
Yeah, me too.
Boy, I tell you, Doris Kearns Goodwin has been everywhere giving speeches. 1995, I attended the Tufts graduation. Doris Kearns Goodwin and her husband Dick Goodwin as commencement speakers. And even though this is from Sam from Fairhaven, he says even though he's not necessarily with her politics or ideology, he loved how she presents her views thoughtfully and does does so without a hint of anger or hate. Wish more political figures and radio talk show hosts, wonder who we could be talking about, would take a page from her playbook.
By the way, the Harvard Crimson story is just posted. Harvard places encampment protesters on voluntary leaves of absence. Exactly as it says. 877-301-8970. We have time for maybe one more. Sean in Groveland. Welcome to the show, Sean. Hi.
Hi. I'm a journalism major at Northern Essex Community College in April. And what I thought was pretty cool, by the way, I'm getting my degree in August when I finish a summer class.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And so I interviewed Tom Bergeron, former host of Dancing with the Stars.
And a local guy.
He's a Northern Essex. Yeah, he's a Northern Essex alum. And so I interviewed him for the student newspaper earlier this semester. And then when I asked him, as the last question, I said, any final words for all of us here at Northern Essex? And what I thought was pretty cool was that he said, oh, well, you can check out my commencement speech when I was the guest speaker in around 2004, maybe it was. But yeah, he said that video is online. So I thought that was pretty cool that he's been a guest speaker at as an alum for the Northern Essex commencement. Yeah.
What are you going to do with yourself after you get your degree?
The plan is to be at Salem State University in the fall, because it'll be an associate's degree, so then I'll continue at Salem State, yeah.
Great. Sean, congratulations. We really appreciate it, and thanks so much for sharing that with us.
John King was the speaker at this woman's American University graduation in 2016.
I'd go to that.
And Admiral William McRaven said at UT Austin graduation as commencement speaker, make your bed every day.
Beautiful.
I like that.
We really needed him to tell us that.
Okay, we are moving on. We're done, because we're going to have some absolutely fantastic music coming up next from this Radius Ensemble. They've been around for many years. They're about to cap off their 25th season. We've got strings, we've got oboes, we've got flutes. We're going to talk with the performers and hear never before heard piece of music right here, debuting at the Boston Public Library. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on The Culture Show, our Arts and Culture Week in Review live at our Boston Public Library studio. Eurovision, the Olympics of pop music featuring acts from ABBA to Zora, is having its most politically charged competition in its history. We also remember artist Frank Stella, who was born in Malden and made a seismic splash in New York in the 1960s before becoming one of our most revered and relevant artists. That and more on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Polar Seltzer, family made in the heart of New England since 1882. Cheers to being 8 years older than radio. Learn more at polarseltzer.com. And Babson College. You can learn how to drive real-world impact and find opportunity in challenges at the school ranked #1 in entrepreneurship by U.S. News & World Report. More at babson.edu/trailblazer.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marge Egan and Jim Browdy. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Doris Kearns Goodwin joins us around 12:30. On Monday, singer-songwriter Rufus Wainwright, who's one of my favorites, will zoom in. And on Tuesday, the 28th of, what month is this? May, the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, will join us for an hour of Ask the Attorney General. It's time for Live Music Friday, always a spirit lifter, and this week is no exception. Next week, Thursday, the acclaimed Radius Ensemble will close out their milestone 25th season, taking audiences through time from 18th century sonatas through the 20th century music inspired by humpback whales, all the way up to present day with the debut of a brand new commission, which we'll hear a bit about in a couple of minutes. Jennifer Mompak is the group's founder and artistic director. We'll talk with her and composer Elena Ruhr in a few minutes. Their show is Thursday, May 16th at 8 p.m. at the Longy School of Music near Harvard Square. For tickets and info, we'll say this again, go to radiusensemble.org. As I said, we'll speak to them in a couple of minutes, but first, 2 players from the Radius Ensemble. We'll be doing a section of a piece from a composer we talked about just a few weeks ago here, Marjorie, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and here they are. From the Radius Ensemble, as I said, joining us now is Jennifer Montbach, the group's founder and artistic director, and a composer whose piece we're going to hear in a few minutes. Elena Ruhr, welcome to you both. It's great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very
Thanks
much
for having us.
both for coming in. So Jennifer, before you tell us about Radius Ensemble, tell us about the music we just heard.
Yeah, so that's a duo by Chevalier de Saint-Georges. He's got a really interesting backstory. He was actually the subject of a 2022 movie, Chevalier, which people may have seen. He was born to a wealthy French plantation owner and his Caribbean slave. And he was raised in France, where he became a famous violinist, composer, and fencer, oddly enough, and a bit of a playboy. But he wrote, he was a contemporary of Mozart, and he wrote just a ton of music, and it's all, as you can hear, lovely.
In that movie, the thing with him and Mozart, that's created, right?
Yeah, I think that's
too bad.
fictionalized.
I like that kind of thing. So, do you want to stay with you just for a second? Tell us a little bit about the ensemble. 25th year anniversary, and the final performance of the season is next Thursday.
That's right. We're a 9-member chamber music ensemble. So, in addition to the folks you see here, we have a full complement of winds, flute, oboe, English horn, bassoon, and we also have strings, piano, and that gives us a lot of flexibility to do music from the classical era all the way through to brand new works written for us, including a piece by my friend here, Elena Ruhr. And our mission is really to reinvigorate classical music. When I graduated from music school, NEC down the street, I was kind of flummoxed that this music I had devoted my life and career to, just people seemed indifferent to it. And I wanted to kind of unlock why classical music wasn't lighting people up the way it lit me up. So we try to make our programs a little bit more accessible without dumbing them down, you know.
Elena, speak to that question about why it wasn't light. I'm a perfect example. I'll explain to you what finally lit me up. I've told this story 1,000 times. But why do people need lighting up about classical music?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's her question, not mine.
Yeah. I'm excited to be here. I'm a fan of the show.
Oh, thank you so
really
much.
great.
We appreciate it.
What lights us up about it? I mean, you know, for me, classical music, I used to write pop music. And for me, I did when I was a teenager. And they were like poems. But for me, when you listen to a classical piece, it's like it's like a novel. Like you can have lots of different characters, lots of different things. It's a more complicated experience, and it's It's really exciting.
So I can't believe I'm going to give you two advice, but I'm going to give you advice anyway. I've told you what my experience was. We were about to have Andres Nelson's on the show for the first time. I had been to one symphony in my life when I lived in New York. I hated it, by the way, because I didn't really want to go. I went because it was a girlfriend, whatever. And out of respect, Marjorie said, you got to go watch the symphony play before you have Andres on. And we went, and it totally changed not only my appreciation of music, but my life. People seeing it, if they think they're not into it, like watching your players, is a whole like eye-opening kind of experience.
There's nothing like live music.
Yeah.
Classical music is definitely meant to be performed and experienced live. And in fact, that's a big part of our mission as well, because we think that the audience is a critical component in making music. That feedback between the audience and us is something that's really meaningful for us. So we try to take the things out of the classical music experience that turn people off, and present repertoire and present it in a method that really allows people to connect.
You're doing it well.
Thank you.
Well, Ellen, I was reading about you. I mean, you're not writing for string quartets. You've written operas. You've written for wind ensemble, for dance, for silent film. So you're all over the place. I mean, is it the same? It can't be the same writing for all those different types of art.
Well, there's some things that are similar. Writing for an orchestra and writing for a string quartet are not that different, because the orchestra is based on the strings, which and a string quartet is sort of a smaller group. But writing opera is a seriously different experience.
Yeah, talk about a novel with a million different plots.
Yeah.
And you know, your theory about classical music too, I'm the daughter of a musician, went to the conservatory, I grew up in my house listening to her teaching piano. And so to me, I mean, pop music compared to Mozart or Bach or I think it's people just don't hear it growing up, and so they don't realize it's like, to me, you're talking pop music and then we're talking.
Yeah, it's intellectually, it's a more challenging experience, and I think what people love about pop music, and I love pop music too, is that it's very expressive in the same way that classical music is. But classical music can really take you to a different level.
I would push back a little there, though, because I think pop music has a really important role in our culture, and
it does.
And I think what's appealing about it is that it's contemporary, and that you can connect with the person making the music.
Yeah.
And that's something that we try to infuse our concerts with. So when we give a performance, we'll talk about the piece a little bit before we play it, and we call them live liner notes.
Oh, okay.
And the audiences really love it, and they feel like, oh, okay, I might not be an expert here, but I can interpret this on whatever level that I'm coming to the concert with.
So if we knew more of the backstory of some of the composers, we could relate to her like Taylor Swift.
Maybe.
No, Marjorie, as I'm sure you know as a fan of the show, Marjorie's a legendary elitist. Everybody knows that. And it just played out there. You know, and Marjorie's going down your resume. The thing that stuck with me, tell me, I hope I didn't get this wrong. When you're part of your MIT deal, you teach students how to write string quartets in the style of Mozart.
I do.
I mean, talk about a focused kind of deal. How intimidating is that for the kid when the kid comes in, or is it?
Well, they're MIT students, but they're pretty good. They're pretty smart. But yeah, they look at me like, you're crazy. I can't do this, because all they have to do is read music to take my class. They do have to read music, and but it's a step-by-step process, and they learn how to.
And how's the end product?
It's pretty good. I mean, we joke that it's kind of like Salieri more than Mozart, so But
luckily, I saw the movie,
that was
so I know what you're
talking
about.
That was true, wasn't it? That was true, Salieri and Mozart, wasn't it?
I was taking a Mozart class when that movie came out from a Mozart scholar, and he said that it's told from the point of view of Salieri, who was crazy. Okay. So it's got a lot of it's
a little poetic license.
Yeah, he was jealous of Mozart.
Yeah.
By
the way, just Jamie just reminded me. Talk about Marjorie's elitism. Do you even know who Tom Rush is, the great folk singer?
Oh God,
he's a good friend of ours. We had somebody on the show a month or two ago who was here for that. Whoever it was. Marjorie says, "This is really music. It isn't like Tom Rush. Anybody can sing a folk song."
I didn't say that.
Yes, you did. You did.
They were opera singers. I think it's a little bit more difficult. Maybe I am just a musical snob. I don't know. I think it's a little bit more different.
Okay, wait.
I want to get to Fraser.
Forget Fraser for a second. We got to introduce your colleagues here, which
yes.
is not just the two just played, but the others who are going to play. Who are they?
Sure. So the duo you just heard, that was Gabriela Diaz on violin.
Hi, Gabriela.
And Noriko Futagami on viola.
Hi there.
And then we're going to play a quintet later, which is one of the middle movements from the world premiere we're giving next week by Elena. And that is scored for flute, and we've got Sarah Brady here on flute. And I will play the oboe, and Miriam Bolkowski on cello. So.
By the way, you failed to mention that Sarah on flute has a mother-in-law, Belinda, whose 70th birthday is tomorrow. So it's Belinda, right? Belinda, happy birthday, Belinda. You should be here, Belinda, but it's okay nevertheless. I'm sorry.
I just really want to quickly ask you guys have performed inside Frasier?
We have,
yeah,
yes.
The performance studio that's at GBH, which is
incredible.
like a magical place. What's so great about Frasier? Right in our building, Jim. Right across from the restroom.
Yeah. Well, the acoustics are great.
That's
there's a
good to
beautiful
know.
piano, and there's incredibly talented engineers with brilliant ears. So it's a great place to
Yeah,
record.
that piano's the biggest piano I've ever seen.
Yeah.
This looks like it's half a football
You
field.
know what happened our first day at GBH when they were trying to lure us here? They took us into Frasier because it is the most beautiful room in the whole building. And Marjorie, because of her piano connection, starts to walk over to the grand, and literally whoever was hosting it says, "Don't touch it." So it's a hell of an introduction there kind of thing. So what did you intend 25 years ago, and have you gotten there?
Yeah, this is what I intended, and I think we've achieved what I had hoped to achieve. I really wanted to sort of use Radius as a laboratory to see if I shook up the concert experience, if we could be, to use your words, elite without being elitist, that we would attract a loyal audience, and we have. You know, at the beginning we were just out of college, and in the last 25 years our careers have exploded. We've had kids, we've put down roots. And we've gone from a really kind of scrappy upstart to an important part of the Boston music scene. So from our perspective, we've arrived and we love our audience, and they've consistently stood by us, and especially through the pandemic, which was a challenging time for a lot of arts organizations.
You're going to go play with your colleagues,
I
right?
am indeed.
So
Yeah,
you want to put your headset down quietly, and we'll talk to Elena for a second?
Yeah, you can tell us what we're going to hear. This is one of your compositions here, world premiere.
Yes, it's the world premiere right now, right here.
Is it?
Yes, it is. It is.
Are you nervous?
Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am too, but I have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So tell us about it.
So the whole piece is for orchestra, and it's called Broadway Boogie-Woogie. That's the name of the whole piece, and there's 4 parts, 4 movements. And the second movement is kind of a ballad, and it's called Ghost Song. And the title refers to the fact that Radius Ensemble is programs old music, like we just heard, but they always commission a new work and they play new music. And so Ghost Song is, it could be maybe an old jazz ballad, or it could be like a 19th century song. It's got 20th century techniques and things like that. But it's like the ghost is the ghost of the music of the past. And it also features Jen, who you've just been listening to speaking, on the oboe. And it's really written for her because it's her ensemble.
You know, one thing we forgot to promote, you may not know, you're on CRB this weekend, are you not? What time? Can you yell? Sundays at 7, Radius Ensemble on our sister station, WCRB. And speaking of the Radius Ensemble, here they are. Beautiful. Just beautiful.
That was spectacular.
Congratulations,
Are you
Lauren.
happy?
That is just fabulous.
Are you happy with your world premiere?
I'm very happy. Yeah.
So are we.
Okay,
That was great.
We have been
Just
listening.
More smart conversation about community issues is up ahead with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan on Boston Public Radio. Right after a news update from NPR. Stay with us here on GBH 89.7.
Support for our programs comes from you.
And Comcast Business, committed to providing connectivity for your business with network and cybersecurity solutions.
Country was ultimately responsible. It took an interview with an American talk show host to get an answer. Netanyahu told Dr. Phil there was going to have to be a thorough examination after the war in Gaza is over as to how Hamas was able to plan and carry out the October 7th attack. When pressed by Dr. Phil, the Prime Minister said the first responsibility of the government is
a protest of suspensions and evictions are met with police violence. It has to put to question, what are these administrators doing and why are they committing so much violence?
MIT's President Callie Kornbluth said in a message that she had no choice but to remove what she called a high-risk flashpoint at the very center of our campus. She said it's her responsibility to make sure that the campus is safe and functioning for everyone. Student protesters are demanding that MIT cut its financial and research ties with Israel. Rescuers and emergency teams are searching for a Massachusetts man missing in a river in Puerto Rico. Officials say 28-year-old Alex Dolomba Tavares of Fall River was apparently swept away by the current at a waterfall on Wednesday. His girlfriend and another couple got out of the water safely. His aunt says she still hopes they'll find him alive because he's a fisherman's son and he knows how to swim. In sports, the Bruins host the Panthers in Game. And for more original reporting, visit gbhnews.org.
Mr. Browdy, I am Marjorie Egan. Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. Thank you. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on youtube.com/GBH News. In a little less than a half an hour, we're going to be joined by Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's here to talk about her terrific new book, Number One Everywhere, an unfinished love story about the 60s and her longtime marriage to Dick Goodwin. And we're going to be joined on Tuesday by the Attorney General of the Commonwealth, and we're back here at the library. And on Monday, singer-songwriter Rufus Wainwright is going to serenade us via Zoom at the Brighton studio.
What you meant to say is we're going to be joined on Tuesday by the Attorney General, just not next Tuesday. Is that what you meant to say?
She's going to be on the Tuesday the 28th.
That was correct.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I thought it was next Tuesday.
Are we clear now?
That's why you're here, Jim.
That's why I'm here now.
To correct my mistakes.
That is why I'm here, among others. Well, that's maybe it, actually. Joining us now on Zoom, our local woman, media maven Sue O'Connell. Sue is co-host of NBC 10's Boston's At Issue every Sunday at 11:30, following Meet the Press, and is featured on Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed trial, which is going on as we speak, weeknights at 7 on NBC 10. Hey, Sue.
Hey, good day to you guys.
And to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for joining us, Sue O'Connell. So you have been reporting live every day from the Karen Reed trial. I'm going to play a little clip to get us in the mood here. This is a clip from the trial where one of John's friends, no, this is a 911 call, excuse me, the 911 call alerting the police to the fact that something had happened to John O'Keefe. It played in the courtroom where Jennifer McCabe is speaking to the operator, and Karen Reed, the defendant, is heard pretty hysterical in the background of the call.
Right out front, you'll see her. I know, I'm on the phone with the ambulance. I know, honey, I know. Look, Carrie, you gotta get off him, honey. Carrie, you gotta get off of him.
Do you know if there was any alcohol or drugs involved?
They had been out.
They've been out drinking?
Yes, but I'm talking hours ago, maybe. And I think I don't know how long he's been in the snow.
Okay, is there any bleeding or anything? Maybe he had his head out?
Yes, possibly. There seems to be bleeding in the face.
So bring us up to date. People may know this is the trial of Karen Reed, who's accused of backing her SUV into her boyfriend, a Boston police officer, John O'Keefe, who was later found dead in the snow where she allegedly hit him. What's the latest, Sue?
Yeah, Marjorie, she's accused of murder, which is part of what is so compelling about this case. And I'm glad you started with that, because there's obviously been a lot of circus-like atmosphere on all levels outside the courtroom and on social media about this. But ultimately, this is a case about a young man, a police officer in Boston, who is, by all accounts, was a great guy that people liked very much, considered a friend, a good son, a good brother. He was raising his late sister and late brother-in-law's two young children in Canton. And what appears from the testimony that we've heard so far, what was a fun night out, and I think many people have characterized it without a lot of information. And I just want to say, I'm approaching this trying to be like a juror. I haven't done these deep dives into the conspiracies, theories, and actualities, it seems, at some levels, about what may or may not have happened. I'm just listening to the evidence presented in the courtroom so I can think like a juror. And the evidence that the prosecution witnesses have told us in the testimony is that it was just a Friday night out for a bunch of friends in their neighborhood, in their local watering holes, that at midnight people were still in good spirits and on their way home, and sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., something terrible happened to John O'Keefe that resulted in his death. And Karen Reed, his girlfriend, who was not living with him but was helping to raise the children, who by all accounts, by the prosecution witnesses, I remind you, friends and family friends who were out with them, said they were a loving couple, that they were having a great night that night. Nobody was too drunk. When they left the Waterfall bar and grill on Washington Street in Canton, everybody was in good spirits, and she is now being charged with his murder. And it has been quite the many days of testimony where we had a string of first responders who testified. As many people probably know by now, there are reports that she said, I did it, whatever happened. But none of the first responders wrote that down in their police reports. And if this was indeed a crime that happened, nobody arrested her on the site. Nobody investigated the house where this incident happened on their lawn. Nobody went in. The crime scene was left open after 9 a.m. The Canton police decided to collect blood evidence in red Solo cups, the kind we play beer pong with. There's just an enormous amount of controversy around the way the Canton police investigated this, and we are learning now about the state police involvement and some of the conflicts of interest. Granted, it's a small town and everyone knows each other and these conflicts come up a lot, but so many days into this prosecution case, if I were a juror, I'd be wondering exactly why they are charging Karen Reed at this point, when many of the prosecution witnesses are giving glowing testimony about her relationship, and at best, the prosecution witnesses who they're hoping to impeach Karen Reed are coming off at best as evasive. On other areas, there's been a charge of perjury against one of the EMTs. So it's a complicated case. We also have cases within cases and trials within trials. Today we heard how the blogger Turtle Boy, Adrian Kearney, he got in today as a member of the press. The Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts has said he can be in there. The prosecution decided they didn't want him in there. We had a hearing within the court. I mean, it's rare to actually have these things happening while a trial is going on. And it was decided by Judge Beverly Cannoni that he cannot be in the courtroom while certain witnesses are testifying. He's been charged with witness intimidation in this case, but he's allowed in the case room with other witnesses. So it's been very complicated and raising more questions, I think, than we're getting answers for.
Let me just say, Sue, I'm glad you're not on my jury, for whatever it's worth. And for people who don't know and haven't sat on a jury and don't know the kind of discussion Sue is having, hey, they really haven't proved anything yet, in my estimation. Jurors can't have that discussion until all the testimony is concluded. And let's see what we hear. And by the way, are there reports that Reed intends to testify, or do we not know?
We haven't heard anything that she would testify. I got to tell you, I don't see any reason why she would.
Yeah, they've got this whole counter-conspiracy theory about how John O'Keefe was taken into this house and he was beaten in the house and then he was brought out into a snowdrift, which is quite an elaborate thing to have gone on, but that's what I think Turtle Boy's thesis is. And
well, no, it's not just Turtle. I mean, I got to tell you, again, not having looked at all these theses, when one of the responding Canton officers, Lieutenant Lang, said, it looks like he's been beaten up. He's missing a shoe. He's missing a hat. There was no immediate evidence of a broken taillight for hours at this crime scene. The people in the house were not investigated in any way until much later. There's really at this point, almost 2 weeks into the trial, still more questions than there are any answers.
We're talking to Karen Reed's defense attorney, Sue O'Connell. Now, Sue, I have a complaint.
We'll see what happens next week, Jim.
I have a complaint.
Every day I'm either pro Karen Reed or anti Karen Reed, depending what the internet thinks.
I just have a quick complaint. I don't know if it's with your station or not. We discussed this with Andrew Cabral yesterday. One of my, I can't call anything I'm involved in a cause celeb. One of my causes, I am obsessed with cameras in the courtroom and lack of cameras in the courtroom. And as we've said ad nauseum here, the contrast between having arguably the most important criminal trial of our lifetime not being televised, Donald Trump, and having not minimizing the horror of losing a loved one, in the case of Officer O'Keefe here, being televised, to me says everything. However, as I said yesterday, I think the camera work on this trial is abominable. And I'll tell you what.
Jim, let me just stop you. We are in the tiniest courtroom that is, I think it's the smallest courtroom in Massachusetts. And we're in that courtroom because the defense said that the jurors, 4 jurors in the bigger courtroom where this normally would be, could not see the witnesses, which it's been going on for 150 years and no one noticed. So we are jam-packed into this tiny, tiny little courtroom, whereas even the spectators who are sitting on the O'Keefe side cannot see the screens where the exhibits are being shown.
Yeah, but I hear that. That's not my complaint. Let me just get it out, and then you can respond to it. As I've said, we have in our studio, we have CNN all the time and 2 monitors and NBC 10, and you guys are broadcasting the trial live. Most of the broadcast of the trial is an insanely close-up of the face of Karen Reed. Someone can be testifying, and one would assume the camera would be on the witness testifying. The camera is so close to her face that it's almost like you can see her pores. And my philosophy, as someone who's believed in this camera in the courtroom thing forever, is the camera should show what you would see if you were in the courtroom, other than the jurors, of course. And what you don't see, and what you don't see is Karen Reed from a foot away.
Do you have the sound on while that's happening?
No, because we're actually trying to do a show.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me explain to you what's happening, Jim.
Yeah.
They have so many sidebars.
Yeah.
There are more sidebars happening in this trial, according to people who know more than I do, than there have been in other trials that have been broadcast. And when there's a sidebar, we can't broadcast the sidebar.
But it's not just sidebars. While we don't have the sound, we do have, what is it called when they have the
L bar?
Not a chyron. Closed caption. Thank you, Zoe. They have the closed caption, and I can see, I don't mean to belabor this, it's just driving me nuts, they have the closed caption, and it's often testimony of a witness at the same time that again, the camera is practically in her ear, but whatever. In any case, what is it like? One last thing. What's it like? Marjorie sat in on murder trials. I've done trials when I was a kid, but nothing like this. What's it like sitting in a room with a high-profile, tense murder trial?
Well, again, it's the intimacy, the weirdness of how small this courtroom courtroom is impacting every single thing that happens. So people have been also complaining that they keep seeing Karen Reed and the defense table, and then just the O'Keefe family facing her. They don't ever see Karen Reed's family. And the reason is there's no way to get a shot of her family because of the way the courtroom is situated. So there's all these problems. You know, it goes from being the way the prosecution has called these first responders. You know, she called members of his family first, but then, 10, 15 first responders, it gets kind of clinical. And then you get a witness who actually knew Michael O'Keefe and knows Karen Reed, and they are emotional, and you could really feel the emotion that they're having because they're right there. So I don't know how it would be in the bigger courtroom where you're a little separated from them, but we're 60 people jammed into a very tiny space, so the highs and lows are really something that you feel.
Talking to Sue O'Connell.
So we were talking earlier with listeners about it's graduation season, about whether they're worried about having graduations at colleges and kids that lost out in the pandemic 4 years ago are now losing out at some colleges in their own graduation from college. So MIT, the president over there, Sally Kornbluth, ordered the students protesting what's happening in Gaza off the campus. I guess many of them left, many of them didn't. State troopers come in 4 o'clock in the morning, helmets and riot gear, and take the protesters out. What do you make of all this, Sue O'Connell? This campus unrest, what happened in MIT, et cetera?
Yeah, this is stating the obvious, but these campuses, both the private universities and the public universities, are struggling with what they have often heralded as a selling point, with some universities talking about their history of protests during the Vietnam War and their history of protests around Black Lives Matter, at the same time struggling with trying to implement new rules that many of them, especially the private universities, have passed over the past couple of years, that they were hoping to reduce the number of opportunities for students to gather with larger numbers, people off, they're tightening campuses, security on campuses, so people who aren't students can be more easily charged with trespassing or removed. I don't have an answer. I obviously support and encourage people to peacefully express their opinions around things and protest. And at the same time, I certainly can relate to students who are not interested in protesting in that way. It doesn't mean they don't care about the issue, but they certainly can do that without protesting. And many are being robbed their opportunity for a graduation again. I'm glad I'm not on campus, and I'm glad I'm not an administrator in any way, shape, or form right now, because it's a very difficult place, I think, for everyone to be. I'm not sure calling in law enforcement is the answer to this. I know there are universities like Brown that have been doing negotiations, and I think those have made more progress in affirming and allowing the students protesting to be heard and containing it from becoming explosive. And I don't think that actually calling in law enforcement is the right answer. But at the same time, let's see how many ways I can have it so I don't offend anyone. At the same time, I keep hearing from law enforcement that they are concerned about not the outside agitators, the old hippies that have been going places, or people who are very pro-Palestine or very pro-Israel, but from other forces that they're afraid, like the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis, who they are telling me they see in the crowds, and they are worried about that influence on these. So again, I don't know what the answer is, Jim and Marjorie, but I hope that there's a way to address this that doesn't involve the result being violence and massive arrests.
Do you want to take one more position on the issue before you go, or not?
Yes, as you know, I have both endorsed Diana Presley and Mike Capuano at the same time.
Stay on this just for a second, only because it is really off-putting to me, because I'm generally an admirer. We talked about, I don't know if you know about this because you've been so immersed in the trial. Did you hear what Hillary Clinton had to say about these young protesters?
No, I saw a clip. Tell me, I didn't get the whole thing.
Well, you read it more carefully than I did from MSNBC.
Basically, she said that they didn't. The kids that were protesting, upset about what's going on in Gaza, don't know the history of the Middle East, and they were uninformed about that and much other of our history. And she went on to talk about her husband, Bill Clinton, trying to broker a deal back in the 90s for peace in Palestine, and brought Yasser Arafat, complained about it. I
sort of like shut up unless you go
I don't know
study your
why
history.
she said that, because I presume the opposite. I presume that a lot of these kids have looked up why they're out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 points to that. One is that, there's a generational issue here, too. I mean, it's, my experience of what happened in the Middle East and someone who's 21 is very different. The other thing, too, is I think we all bring our biases to this. I've never been a protester. I remember very vividly being at a meeting in 1985 around the state's response to the AIDS crisis, and someone suggested we go handcuff ourselves to the fence around our state capitol at Beacon Hill. And I said, can't we just try and get a meeting with the governor? I mean, it's, so my bias coming at this is the last thing I want to do. I don't even like to be in parades. The last thing I want to do is protest, but it doesn't mean I don't care a lot about an issue. So it's hard for me to answer. I mean, my bias is go to class and take action in a different way. And they teased me, too, when I started the Mission Hill Civic Association and we wanted to have a standout. I went and got permits from the police to do it, and there were only 12 of us. So, I mean, my bias is a little different. My bias is make change, don't disrupt it for everyone. But I also understand, the number of casualties, civilian deaths are huge.
Okay.
And you got to get the attention somehow.
Right, and if you don't disrupt, you're not going to get attention, and you don't have impact on people. Can we do one last thing?
Yes, here's something you may have a very decisive.
But we should be clear why we're doing this. We have raised this issue with every guest we've had since Chuck Todd yesterday, and we're too embarrassed to raise the issue with Doris Kearns Goodwin because it'll be humiliating. So we figure we'll raise it with you. What do you think about the worm?
So I think we're all carrying a lot of worms around with us.
Yeah.
And I think we shouldn't be surprised by the fact that I fell into a terrible, I don't want to say rabbit holes. I can't say what I was going to replace it with, of watching bears on X and showing the tapeworms and how you can see the tapeworms in bears. And if you watch them, and it's really gross. And if you watch some of these survival shows, like Alone or Naked and Afraid, when they get the food that they have to get, the fish, they catch a fish and they're so excited of it and they cut it open and it's filled with worms. So I think there are more worms among us than there are of us.
That's an excellent answer.
Okay, so I think in terms of a future president, I mean, there may be lots of worms around, but how do you feel about a man who's had a lot of odd ideas about a lot of things? That would be RFK Jr.
With a worm in his head.
Does the worm in his head, the worm is dead at this juncture, as far as we know. Does this concern you as a future president, or are you okay? He said the worm ate part of his brain. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we've got bigger problems with RFK. How he came to be this way, I don't think we can fix it.
Okay.
So, it is what it is. He's got a dead worm in his head compared to some other things.
Let's
look
move
at what
on,
we're comparing.
right?
Yeah.
We don't want to blame the worm, I guess, is what.
I don't want to blame the worm.
You don't want to blame the worm.
Although I think if I had to spend that much time in RFK's brain, I too would be dead at this point. Self-inflicted, probably.
RFK Jr., let's be clear.
Yeah.
Hey, Sue O'Connell, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for your time.
Good
we
to
really
talk to
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sue O'Connell. We've been speaking with our local woman and media maven, Sue O'Connell, who has been at the Karen Reed trial every single solitary day in the courthouse over there in Dedham, very small courthouse apparently over there in Dedham courtroom. Anyway, she is co-host of NBC 10's Boston At Issue, which runs every Sunday morning at 11:30 right after Meet the Press, and is featured on Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed trial, every night at 7 o'clock on NBC 10, NECN. That's Sue O'Connell. A lot of letters there. but I made it through.
Okay.
NBC 10 and NECN. Okay.
Exactly.
We're moving on.
We are.
The great historian Doris Kearns Goodwin is with us on her great best-selling book. It's #1 in the New York Times and Washington
What a
Post.
shock.
Yeah, it's taken the country by storm. An unfinished love story of personal history.
For this year's college seniors, graduation caps a crazy 4-year journey, one that started with the pandemic and ends with the anti-war protests.
I was like getting back to my dorm and there were like hordes of state troopers out here. That definitely was not like, oh, this is normal. That was like, that's actually kind of crazy.
I'm Mary Louise Kelly, reflections from the class of 2024 on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And National Grid, helping businesses work toward a sustainable future by offering guidance on heat pump solutions. Learn more about how heat pumps can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions at ngrid.com/future. And Hebrew Senior Life, a Harvard Medical School affiliate, empowering seniors to reach their full potential with a wide range of services. You can discover senior living, healthcare, aging research, and more at allweareforyou.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jim Browdy. She's Marjorie Egan. We're live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Monday, when we're here, I can't believe we've even talking about Monday, but in any case, singer-songwriter Rufus Wainwright, whom I love, will zoom in on Monday. The Attorney General will join us at the library on the 28th from 11 to 12. We're joined now at the interview desk by Pulitzer Prize-winning author, historian, national treasure, local treasure, and pretty wonderful person, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Her latest spectacular book, Marjorie and I just finished it last night, I think, An Unfinished Love Story, Personal History of the 60s. We'll tell you all about it in a minute. She'll be at the First Parish Church, which is a great place, in Cambridge tonight for a Harvard bookstore event. First, she joins us on BPR. And Doris, I want to say, it's a pretty big crowd for us, so you better not screw it up. That's all I can say.
I promise to try. Who
Doris,
knows?
it's great to see you.
I'm so glad to be with you guys. This has been a staple. Whenever I do a book, it really is a good talisman to be
We're
here.
thrilled to have
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. I said to Doris before we went on the air, this is not just a wonderful story about the 60s. It's a wonderful story about your romance and your life up in Concord with your husband and your kids and the whole thing. But tell us how this began, how you went back into the documents that Dick Goodwin had saved from the 60s and created this book.
Well, through our entire married life for 42 years, he had schlepped these boxes around with us. They were in basements, they were in attics, they were in storage, and he wouldn't open them because the 60s had ended so sadly with the death of Robert Kennedy, who he was with when he died, and his great friend Martin Luther King, and the campus violence and the riots in the streets. So they just stayed there, and I had looked in them. I knew they were going to be great to open. Finally, he turns 80. He comes down the stairs singing, and he says, "Oh, what a beautiful morning." And I said, "What's going on?" He says, "I'm going to open the boxes. It's now or never." And this is the way he talked. If I have any wisdom to dispense, I better start dispensing now before it's too late. So we made a deal that every weekend we would look in the boxes and we'd do them from the beginning to the end so that we would pretend we didn't know the sorrow that would come later and enjoy the extraordinary part of the 1960s.
Songs from Oklahoma, correct? I have it right?
You got it exactly right.
You know, I can't believe I'm going to ask you a question about self-doubt, but I'm going to try to get it out looking at you. This was intended to be his thing with you helping. Obviously, he died in the middle of this, and it became your thing. Were you nervous about doing this project that you were intended to be essentially the aide, the partner to your husband, and all of a sudden it was yours, and how much it meant to him?
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't sure for really about a year and a half. I was moving from Concord to Boston, so there were a lot of things happening in my life, and I was still processing the fact that he had died. I was afraid that if I spent a couple more years on this, I'd be living without him and would only make me sad. As it turned out, once I decided to finally do it, it meant that he was coming alive again. I mean, I spent my whole life bringing dead presidents to life. So here I had a guy who was my husband, and I could bring him back to life for people, as well as tell a story of history, and as well as a biography and a memoir and all these things. And then I'd be in it too. So it was a new form for me in a sense. So it was scary.
But by the way, I have to say, I know I knew a lot about your husband. I know so much more after having finished the book. And he was such an intimate part of history that is so important to all of us today.
Well, some of it that was fascinating to you is because you were reading about his life before you knew him, and reading letters from his early days. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I always wanted to know what he was like as a young man. I wished I'd always met him in college and that we had been the same age. He was 12 years older than me. So I kept asking him, what were you like when you were 20? Tell me, would I have fallen in love with you? And he said, how do I know what I was like? I was too busy being him to tell you what he was like. But I found 50 letters that his best friend and he had exchanged together, and the best friend had given Dick's parts back to him before he died. And I loved the guy that I read about. I mean, he was so vibrant and arrogant in some ways, and brassy, and full of self-deprecating humor. And I realized that, yes, this is the guy I would have fallen from. So I also found in him a different person than I knew. There was a sadness in him from the time I met him, because his first wife had died, John Kennedy died, Bobby Kennedy had died, all that sadness had happened. He was full of vitality, but there was that layer. But the young guy I met was just, I greet every day with Eureka, every cheerful face I find. So it was interesting, and we talked about that, and it really helped to talk about that before he died.
Well, speaking of Dick Goodwin in his 20s, he ended up serving a guy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, in the White House. How'd that happen?
Well, what happened is they needed a second speechwriter because Ted Sorensen was there alone, and he was going to become a candidate for the presidency. So Dick was asked to write a speech and then write another one. He just thought that he was being asked to draft a speech. Turned out he was in a contest that he didn't even realize 30 other people had been asked the same thing, and they chose him to do it. So he's still in his 20s. He's on the plane with John Kennedy. It's a small prop plane, so it's so intimate. You see the chairs that he was sitting in that turned into beds for him and Ted. John Kennedy had his own bed in the back of it. But there was a small team compared to today, so there was a real sense of, I can see why they felt they were connected to one another.
I remember they named the plane the Caroline after his daughter, Caroline.
Correct.
But let's play a little sound of JFK. This is in 1960. He's calling on students at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor to dedicate part of their lives to public service. Here's JFK.
How many of you are willing to work in the Foreign Service and spend your lives traveling around the world? On your willingness to do that, not merely to serve 1 year or 2 years in the service, but on your willingness to contribute part of your life to this country, I think will depend the answer whether a free society can compete. I think it can, and I think Americans are willing to contribute, but the effort must be far greater than we've ever made in the past.
So he's talking about the Peace Corps, and Dick was very involved in this. Tell people.
I love this story because what happens is he wasn't planning to speak that night at the University of Michigan. He was simply going there to sleep the next morning to go on a whistle-stop tour of the state. He gets there at 2 a.m. There are 10,000 kids who've been waiting for him all night. So he says, oh, I better say something. Dick and Ted had gone off to the cafeteria to get something to eat. And so he's on his own. And look what he did. He came up with this extemporaneous, it was a 3-minute speech. He said it was the longest, shortest speech he'd ever given. And in it is the birth of the Peace Corps. He didn't even mention the name. What happened, and this is how change often happens, it should make young people feel a sense of possibility. There were 2 graduate students listening. The kids were so excited by those questions. They put out a pledge to 1,000 people signed a pledge, young students, yes, we'll give 2 or 3 years of our life. And then it was learned by Ted and Dick that they had done that. They brought the pledge up to JFK, and then they announced the Peace Corps. So the birth of the Peace Corps took place because the kids took the action. So it's really those kids that are responsible. And
Based
that's what
upon
happened.
that 2 a.m. speech.
Exactly.
That's just incredible. It really is incredible. We're talking, obviously, to Doris Kearns Goodwin, this incredible book, An Unfinished Love Story, a personal history of the 60s. Now, you both worked for, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was also going to say, I learned a lot about the closeness between Jacqueline Kennedy and your husband, Dick, and you have this great description of this Nobel laureate dinner. Tell people that.
You know, what happened is they had worked together on a number of projects. They became close. And he sent her a memo saying, how about a dinner for the Nobel Prize winners? And that turned into what has been called the Dinner in Camelot. All of them came, and then Pulitzer Prize winners were there. And what was so glittering about it was many of them in different fields were meeting each other for the first time, people that they admired too. And he got to escort, Dick, my husband, got to escort Jackie to that dinner. And there's a picture that was always on our wall he was so proud of. He's walking, the violinists are there. He looks like he's just in heaven. But they became good friends, even after that. Dick was a big cigar smoker, and he taught her how to smoke one puff at a time each time they met each other. And he figured finally she had smoked at least a complete cigar before it was all over. An odd thing to think about her doing.
By the way, I just want to interrupt to say, I'm listening to the two of you talk. You know how sometimes you have you step out of the environment you're in? I look at you and I said, oh my God, that's Doris Kearns Goodwin.
That's right. That's right.
Just really strange. We're talking to Doris Kearns Goodwin.
And you also talk about how Jackie wrote him letters, and they had this correspondence going on. You have a great description, too, of Kennedy's assassination. That night when the body came back from Dallas to the White House. Tell us about how Jackie was involved in making the East Room I think as you put it, a private and dignified space for his body to arrive, and what they did to the White House.
Yeah, as soon as he heard the news, my husband did part of a small team to plan for the funeral, and they got word that what Jackie wanted was for the East Room to look as it had looked when Lincoln was there. So they had to go break into the Library of Congress, which was closed. They had to use flashlights to get the material because the lights were out, and they found a drawing of what it was like for Lincoln. And then they all worked together to hang the crepe, to make it look like it did, so she would feel that at least he had come home, just as you say, in a dignified way. And then my husband was also responsible for getting the eternal flame that she wanted. She knew then she wanted him like a little boy who would want light, to always be there, to have light. So he had to call the Pentagon. They couldn't get it. They finally got it, and it was at the gravesite by the time he got there.
Yeah, what was the concern? That somehow it wasn't going to light if she lit it, or because Jacqueline lit it the funeral day?
It was so last minute. They had propane tanks there. They finally had something and they tested it, but they thought, what if it doesn't work when she does this? And it worked. So it gave a beautiful moment, actually, to what was such a sad moment.
I love the description of those small pots of light in the driveway, so that when the body came in the driveway, the lights would be there, and the black crepe all on the windows and all that.
Yeah, this was all for her to feel that he was coming home to a lit White House, because it would have been dark at night. So they knew only when they had parties did they have these outdoor lights. So they made sure to get those lights. Everything was last minute. So they were there without sleeping for a couple days.
Okay, so you and your husband worked for LBJ at different times, but even those of us who are not great historians know that if you're a JFK guy, like your husband was, you don't work for LBJ. So how'd that happen?
Yeah, there really were fault lines, especially between Bobby and LBJ. I think Bobby could never bear to look at LBJ as president because he thought his brother, who he loved more than himself, should have been there. So that was part of it. And so what happened is, though, after Dick had left the JFK administration, obviously he wasn't sure what he was going to do, we found a tape that showed us the origin of how he got there to be a Kennedy person getting to the White House. Johnson's talking to his aide, Bill Moyers, and you hear him on the tape saying, I need somebody who can write speeches for me. I want somebody who can put sex into the speeches. I want somebody who can put rhythm into the speeches. I want somebody who can write great Churchillian phrases. I mean, it's just crazy. Who do you know? And Moyers, who knew Dick from the Peace Corps, said, the only one is Goodwin, but he's not one of us. But Johnson decided, well, let's let him try on a poverty message that really cared, and he ended up becoming his main speechwriter. And it was probably the most important work that he did in public life, working on the Great Society, working on the We Shall Overcome speech.
You know, Doris, since you've covered so much of American history, let me posit something and tell me if this is true. My takeaway from a lot of American history is some of the great things that have ever been conceived have been conceived when several naked men get together. Would you agree? Is that generally the case?
He's actually right, I must say. No,
tell this
I'll tell the
story.
It won't sound as crazy as it is. Well, maybe it will. What happened is about a month after Dick got there, Moyer said, okay, he wants to talk to us now about a Johnson vision. He's gotten the tax cut through, which was Kennedy's. He's getting the civil rights bill that Kennedy had inspired and put in. Now he wants his own program. So he wants us to talk about it. So Dick says, where? In the Oval Office? He said, no, in the White House pool. So they get to the White House pool, and Johnson's in there naked, swimming up and down the pool. And he looks like a whale, Dick said. And then they're wearing their suits and their ties. And he says, come on in, guys, come on. So they just have to strip on the spot. The next thing you know, 3 naked guys are swimming around the pool. And then Johnson pulls over to the side. He says, okay, guys, now let me tell you what I want to do. And this is the amazing part. He had a vision of everything he wanted. He wanted Medicare. He wanted aid to education. He wanted to finish civil rights. He wanted voting rights. He wanted immigration reform. He wanted NPR. He wanted PBS. And they're just exhausted listening to him. And then they said, well, we'll make a speech, and that's where we'll announce what this thing will be. They didn't even have the word Great Society. So they started debating, what are we going to call this Johnson program? Somebody thought it should be called a better deal instead of a new deal. Someone thought it should be called Glorious Society. But Dick put into 1 or 2 speeches a Great Society, and it caught on. So that's how the Great Society was born.
Can you tell for younger listeners, I mean, there were hundreds of bills that effectuated this thing. Just that you touched on some of them. Spend a second or two on some of the powerful things that we benefit from 60 years later
Yeah,
today.
I mean, just look around you. I mean, the thing that was so amazing about this program was that he announces it then in April and May of 1964. He wins the election big, and then he puts his mastery of the Congress behind him, and hundreds of bills are formed. Pollution control, aid to the cities, everything you think about in terms of health care. You think about education, secondary education, student loans, student scholarships. He just had a feeling that it was an affluent society that deserved to give more of its affluence to ordinary people all the way up and down the scale. And that was what's amazing about it. When you think about, he went to the same place, the University of Michigan, that JFK had been.
Right.
That was kind of chutzpah to do that. And he asked a similar series of questions to those kids, saying, are you willing to really fight for everybody in the society having a free chance to get where their talents and their discipline can take them? So it really was, and the country was behind it at that time. They wanted the country to be better for everybody, not just for the people at the top.
Well, speaking of the country better for everybody, including people whose skin color was not the same, the words that your husband wrote that had the most impact for me every time I hear them is the speech that LBJ gave after the violence at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. And I'm assuming most people know the incredible last several words. Here's just a little piece of this 1965, let's call it his We Shall Overcome speech.
These are the enemies: poverty, ignorance, disease. They are enemies, not our fellow man, not our neighbor. And these enemies too, poverty, disease, and ignorance, we shall overcome.
It's unbelievable. Was there any doubt that he'd say those words?
Well, it was such an interesting moment because Johnson decided on a Sunday night that he was going to give this speech to a joint session of Congress calling for the voting rights bill after the country had been so shocked by what they saw at that bridge. The Alabama state troopers set upon the peaceful marchers led by John Lewis, sending many to the hospital, and we all saw it on television. I was watching it as a graduate student. I couldn't believe it was my country. And so Dick had only that day to write the speech. And he starts it off with, he always wanted a great line to start it off. He starts it off, I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. I mean, how can you do that in that time? God. And then he said, every now and then history and fate meet at a certain time in a certain place. So it was in Lexington and Concord, so it was in Appomattox, so it was in Selma, Alabama. Not a northern problem, not a southern problem. It's not a moral problem. It's simply wrong to deny your fellow Americans the right to vote. But then in the middle of the day, he was so tired, he went out to have one of his trademark cigars, and he heard people in the distance singing, We Shall Overcome. He came back in, and then he brought the anthem of the civil rights movement into that speech. And that's when change happens, when the country is fired its conscience by some movement, whether it's a gay rights movement, a women's movement, a civil rights movement, progressive movement, and then the people in power respond. And then 6 months later, the Voting Rights Act passed. So that was a great moment.
You know, a couple of times it's mentioned that 2 Brookline boys, this is going back to JFK and your husband, Dick Goodwin, but where did all this come from? I mean, he obviously, I know he's #1 in his law school class at Harvard, which is no mean feat, but
with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the class.
That's right. That's right. That was a great picture.
There's that picture.
Yeah.
That picture.
Great
if
picture.
I just describe it for a minute, I came upon this picture just after he'd been writing a letter to his great friend, George Cuomo, saying he's now the editor of the Law Review. I can get a job anywhere in the country. It's a burden of choice. What should I do? Should I go there or here? And I got so mad at him because I found this picture of the Law Review, and there's 2 women out of the 60 guys. One is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She can't even get an interview for a job. Right. So I said, it's your fault. No, it's not my fault. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
What was his upbringing like? I mean, obviously he was a really smart guy. Some people would say he's a genius. How did this happen for him?
Well, he loved history, number one, and he loved Lincoln. So when I worked on Lincoln, it was such a partnership to be able to work with him on that. But also, after he became first in his class at Harvard Law Review, he had not had, his family was a middle-class family, but his father had lost his job during the Depression and never quite recovered. So he came back to school to do footnotes for the other professors. He was in the library. He said, I've been in libraries my whole life. I've got to get away. He volunteered for the Army. And that was a really important thing for him. He went to France. Unlike my son Joey, who was in combat after 9/11, he was like Stripes in a way. But still, he saw Europe. And he thought it was the most exciting thing for him in the world to go from one country to another. But then when he came home, he realized, he said, there's something about, he was back at Fort Dix, there's something about America that even if it's not true, a person can believe they can rise through the system, and we've got to make them do that. And that was his mission from then on. He loved history. He felt so grateful to America having come back from the Army that I think the rest of his life he used those words to bring us closer to our ideals. That's really what it was about. Always, every speech of his had to do with something that we believed in from the days of the Declaration, the Constitution, the framers, the beliefs of America that still were not being realized.
Well, I read that part of the reason this meant so much to you, this project of going through his papers and writing this book, was to kind of reconvince him that all that he had done with JFK and Johnson and RFK mattered.
Oh, you're so right. I mean, I think the emotional thing that was so important for me is that he had come away from the 60s, as I say, with this sense of sadness, and he felt like the war, he had turned against the war after he left the administration and had been very activist against it. He was with Gene McCarthy in New Hampshire, then he was with Bobby in his campaign, and he felt like the Great Society had been swallowed up. I mean, he knew rationally that wasn't true, but he felt it emotionally. But then once we'd been through those years of 64 and 65 together, remembering that we were forgetting what happened later, I remember once when we went up to bed and he couldn't go to sleep, he said, oh my God, I'm beginning to feel affection for that old guy, LBJ, again. and he did. He began to realize what extraordinary things LBJ did, and it made him feel like he had done something important, that the country had been made better. And it coincided with the 50th anniversary of all these great laws, Medicare and Medicaid and aid to education and voting rights and civil rights. And as a result, the country was beginning to absorb what Lyndon Johnson had done. So that in that last year when he died, he really felt like maybe I have been able to contribute something to the country. And I think we all want to believe that we've left something behind. And he felt like he had left something behind, and boy, did he.
You also wrote about this, Robert Kennedy referred to it before, RFK, his feeling that LBJ was stealing the bills that should have belonged to John Kennedy, and there was a constant friction between the two men.
Yeah, interestingly, one time Bobby was so sad at the fact that he had only lived, his brother, 3 years, and he didn't have a fair shot at getting remembrance in the same way. So Dick said to him, well, Julius Caesar only lived 3 years, and he's surely remembered today. And then Bobby quipped back, yeah, but it helps to have Shakespeare write about you.
By the way, we have an anonymous texter who says, I am in tears listening to Doris Kearns Goodwin. How do we get back to this level of integrity and honor? Glorious segment. I'm going to buy the book now. We're going to talk about how we get back to that in a couple of minutes. But staying with the book for a second, before Dick had this moment where he said, whatever he said, I love that bastard, or whatever he said to you that night.
See how he says it.
Well, whatever he said.
Probably more like you than me.
What was it like for the two of you when you were on different sides of the LBJ story? I said before you worked for him, but not at the same time that Dick did. And obviously he was totally disenchanted, which I think is an understatement, because of the war. What was it like for the two of you?
It was hard. It was hard because I felt so loyal to LBJ. I mean, without LBJ, my presidential historian career would not have happened. I mean, I got a White House fellowship. You know, as you know, I think we've talked about this. I danced at the White House in the celebration. And then 2 days later or so, an article I'd written prior to being made a White House fellow about LBJ and the war came out in the New Republic with the title, How to Remove Lyndon Johnson in 1968. And instead of kicking me out of the program, he just said, oh, bring her down here for a year, and if I can't win her over, no one can. And I got to know him very well. I helped him on his memoirs. I got to know Lady Bird very well. I was loyal to them. And when Dick would just continually talk about the war, I wanted to talk about the Great Society. And I kept saying, but he passed all the bills that your guy, JFK, then my guy inspired your guy, he would say. It wasn't funny. It was a sad kind of argument because the loyalties were in different directions. And then through the book itself and the working on the projects and the boxes, I began to see what JFK was like as a young man and how extraordinary he was in learning. He could learn from his mistakes. He became a much better speaker. At the beginning, he spoke so fast. I think about this because I speak so fast. He spoke so fast that people said that he looked like a student. He couldn't wait to get back to his place. But then he would ask the reporters, how did I do? Where did I lose them? And I really began to respect even more. And you saw from the Bay of Pigs, he made a mistake. He acknowledged it right away, which is not happening many times today. And then he learned for the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I began to develop more feeling for him and he for LBJ. So we came together in the end, realizing that the two of them, they all sort of make one. They would, if they'd been one president, they would have been the best there possibly could have been.
Well, you painted a very homey, inviting picture of the LBJ Ranch down in Texas, which you visited many times.
Yeah, it was, the first time I went was Memorial Day weekend in 1968. And what a time it was. We got there, and it was late, but he wanted to go swimming in the pool immediately at midnight. And then at 7 in the morning, I'm called to go back in the pool. I don't know how I did I would have been worried about my hair all the time. And I don't like to swim necessarily, but he liked to talk in the pool. So you talked, and meanwhile, there were rafts on which there were floating phones and floating memo pads in case you wanted to say something. And then we had Gregory Peck was there that weekend, Henry Ford was there. I mean, for me as a young graduate student, it was an experience never to be forgotten. And he was just, he was a formidable guy. He would drive you around the ranch, show you where he was born, and then he talked. And then in the last years of his life, when he really talked to me about hoping that he would be remembered for other things than Vietnam, he wanted to talk to me about Congress and about civil rights. Those were my 2 chapters in the memoir, so it made him happy. So I just listened to him, and he could never stop talking, and I loved listening.
He also had a lot of ailments, depression and anxiety you talk about as well. The heart disease, we knew about that, but he was not a well man for quite some time.
And especially what would happen is before every election, some physical ailment would come, appendicitis or kidney stones. I mean, real physical ailments, but somehow stress had brought these things on. And so he one time wrote a letter to a friend saying, just remember that politicians are strange ducks. Anyone that has to go down begging on their knees for people to vote for them, it's going to be really hard when an election comes. So know that when the election's over, I'll be okay again.
Before we take a break, we've discussed Bobby Kennedy a lot here. Your husband wrote the Day of Affirmation speech, did he not? Let's just listen to a little piece of what Bobby Kennedy had to say. This is 1966, and he's speaking at the University of Cape Town.
Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance.
Can it get any more beautiful and powerful in one sentence? It is just incredible.
And that's on his grave, actually. It's on Robert Kennedy's grave.
Yeah.
And Dick Goodwin was with him in Los Angeles.
He was with him when he died, yes. But if we could just go back to that speech, because I think what's so important about it is that the kids who were there at Cape Town were fighting apartheid, and they were under enormous pressure from the government. In fact, the person who'd invited him to the speech was banned for 5 years, which meant that he couldn't leave his room. The next person who was the vice president was Margie Marshall, who becomes Margie Marshall, our Margie Marshall in Boston, Chief Justice, who makes gay marriage possible. She was with him that whole time. And I had never known that. We had known her and her husband, Tony Lewis, and for some reason we'd never spoken about the fact that this part of that speech was at her wedding ceremony with Tony. It was on Tony's memorial. And now I've connected to Margie, and we've talked about this whole thing. It's wonderful. It's just been a great part of this whole process.
I don't know how to put this because Marjorie's going to mock me when I ask this question before we take a break. When you are able, out of your head, Dick, to come out with not only the most beautiful language that one can possibly imagine, but the most impactful, beautiful language, I didn't know when I heard that speech. I didn't know when I heard We Shall Overcome. I didn't know when I heard the Great Society speech that this guy, Dick Goodwin, was responsible for those words. Was that hard I know, stop it, Marjorie. I know you're going to say,
He would have wanted
because Jim
a
wants
byline.
credit for everything, right? That is exactly what. Was it hard for him? I mean, he had a pretty big ego too, by the way. Was it hard for him?
I think what he would be, this is one of the few times when he would be humble and aware of realities. None of it would have mattered. People themselves didn't have the convictions. So if he had written that speech for himself to give in Brookline, it might have been exciting. Or as he said, if Patrick Henry had said, give me liberty or give me death at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, it would have meant nothing, right? But so he knew that he needed the convictions, and he knew Lyndon Johnson well, so he knew what he believed. He'd talked to him many times about civil rights. He knew Bobby well. He knew what Bobby cared about. And similarly, when you work with JFK, you know that. You have to learn their cadences. You can't speak the same way for any of them. So that was a talent, but mostly it depended upon the person in power having the courage and the willingness to say the things that you want him to say.
Before we take a break, can we end the discussion about the book before we talk about current events at the beginning? Just spend a minute and describe that first encounter with Dick Goodwin when you're sitting in your second floor office at Harvard and this guy happens in.
Yeah, it was 1972, so it was after both of us had not ever met during Lyndon Johnson's time. And we heard that we were all nerds there, of course. We're history and government people. We'd heard that Richard Goodwin was coming to take a room there to finish a book, and we knew he'd worked for Kennedy and Johnson and Bobby. So we were excited. But I was up in my office on the second floor, and all of a sudden he just plops in with his wild eyebrows, his wild hair, and he sits on the chair where my two T's were supposed to sit. And he just starts off, so you're a graduate student, are you? And I said, no, I'm an assistant professor. And I told him all the things that I was teaching. And we started talking, and we talked all that afternoon. We talked about JFK and LBJ, but we talked about the beleaguered Red Sox, of which we were both enormous fans. We talked about music and astronomy, and he was philosophy. He was so interested in so many things. Then we continued talking in Boston that night. We went to a restaurant in Back Bay, and then we talked for 42 more years.
It's beautiful.
We are talking with Doris Kearns Goodwin. The book is An Unfinished Love Story, a personal history of the 1960s. We're going to keep talking with Doris Kearns Goodwin after a quick break. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on The Culture Show, our Arts and Culture Week in Review live at our Boston Public Library studio. Eurovision, the Olympics of pop music featuring acts from ABBA to Zora, is having its most politically charged competition in its history. We also remember artist Frank Stella, who was born in Malden and made a seismic splash in New York in the 1960s before becoming one of our most revered and relevant artists. That and more on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And We Clean Heat Pumps, providing cleaning and maintenance of ductless mini-split heat pumps for the protection of air quality in homes and businesses as AC season is here. More at WeCleanHeatPumps.com. And Eversource, committed to helping businesses reach sustainability goals and lower their energy use through energy assessments and custom recommendations. Learn more at Eversource.com.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan and Jim Browdy. We're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. I think it's fair to say the only thing better than reading An Unfinished Love Story, a personal history of the 1960s, is listening to Doris Kearns Goodwin talk about An Unfinished Love Story, a personal history of the 60s. We're graced by her presence. She'll be at the First Parish Church tonight in Cambridge for a Harvard Bookstore event in conversation with Beth Lasky, who's right over there. For more information, go to harvard.com/events.
That's right. You can also listen to it in Audible Books because you did the narration on Audible Books.
I did.
Yeah, usually the authors don't get the cut, Doris Kearns Goodwin. You did. Yeah, that was great. So I mentioned during the break that there's a section in the book toward the end when you're talking about the 1968 convention. And of course, that became a very violent scene out there in Chicago, and Eugene McCarthy, your husband, was involved with him. So tell us about that whole scene. And the reason I bring it up now is we're having campus demonstrations right now about a different subject.
Now, of course, this is what I've been thinking about a lot. I've been transported back in time to what was going on in the campuses in the 1960s. And there's two different models for what happened in the 1960s with campus desire to end the war in Vietnam. The first was that in 1968, Eugene McCarthy agreed to run for the presidency against Lyndon Johnson. And all over the country, kids came from every state of the country, and they planted themselves in New Hampshire, the first primary. The boys cut their hair and their beards so that they could be able to persuade people. The girls wore long dresses. They went in every Democratic house in New Hampshire, and they simply talked to the people. And this was a time when old and young were split apart, and the people loved to hear them believe in something, and they voted for McCarthy as a result of that. So those kids were incredibly successful. And what happened was, after he won that primary almost, then Lyndon Johnson decided 2 weeks later to give a speech where he said he was going to stop the bombing, which was part of what the critics wanted. He was going to negotiate with the North Vietnamese, and he was going to withdraw from the race. And here's where fate intervenes. He was so well received for that. People said he was sacrificing himself for the good of the country. All of a sudden, signs were, "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." And then on April 3rd, North Vietnam agreed to come to the bargaining table. He said it was the happiest day of his presidency. On April 4th, the whole White House plane is loaded with people to go to Hawaii. Lyndon Johnson was supposed to join them later that night to start the talks. And he gets a message that Martin Luther King had been shot. And then riots take place, everything gets derailed, and the peace talks take a while to happen. And then the frustration is still there when all of a sudden Bobby Kennedy dies, and then the same kids come to the Democratic National Convention, but there are also lots of other groups that are there with other agendas. Some of them wanted just mayhem, some of them just disturbing, and Mayor Daley has thousands of police ready, and confrontations happen, and the Democrats lose the election that night.
I'm betting you read the Nick Kristof piece in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago where he talked about the parallels, 1968 in Chicago and the riots, 2024 Democratic Convention in Chicago. Bernie Sanders said the other day Gaza could be Joe Biden's Vietnam. Could it be?
Well, I think it so much depends on what's going to happen now. I mean, what the story of 1968 tells us, nobody would have guessed in March that Lyndon Johnson would not be in the race, that Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King would die. It's hard to know what the state of the war will be by the time we're in October or November. Maybe with some luck, there's a ceasefire that takes hold. Maybe there's beginning talks about what might happen for the future of those two beleaguered lands. And then it might be less of an importance. But right now, it's obviously got the same message. So once you get violence, once buildings are taken over or traffic is disrupted, then it's much harder to allow you to create public sentiment, which is what you're hoping to do in the long run. And that's what happened in 1968 at the Democratic Convention.
Although here, we've talked a lot about whether colleges have handled this the right way. We had MIT last night, 4 o'clock in the morning, bringing in, early in the morning, I should say, 4 o'clock in the morning, bringing in state troopers to get the students out of there. I mean, there's a lot of upset about these campus situations. On the other hand, they're bringing a lot of attention to what is going on in Gaza. So how do you handle this?
I mean, I think what you know is that for young people to be deeply involved in caring about an issue, this one is so complicated, though, obviously much more so in many ways than anti-war was in the 1960s. And then you have to be so careful of the messages you're leaving, and some of it has dealt into anti-Semitism, and then you're going to lose the very battle if you have hatred on that side when there's so much that needs to be fought on the side of humanitarian aid and what needs to go on in Gaza. So that it requires a really complicated, sensitive way, and I think you need leaders that can keep you disciplined and keep you on the subject of what you care about deeply.
So Doris Kearns Goodwin, if we were talking to you, let's say in 2015 or 2014, and we said in not too many years, there's going to be a guy leading for the presidency who is found in a civil proceeding to have raped a woman, a guy who in another proceeding is found to have committed $500 million of business fraud, and a guy who is credibly accused of attempting to overthrow the government of the United States. And if the election were today, John King said to us last week, he'd likely be the next president of the United States. How do you explain that?
I think the hardest thing for me to have imagined in 2014 was that there would be a loser in a presidential race who was unwilling to accept the loss. Every other time in our history, it's very hard for a person who's lost a race to go and give that concession speech.
Didn't Dick write the Gore thing?
Dick worked with Al Gore on that concession speech, too.
Yeah.
I mean, here, Al Gore felt that the Supreme Court had made the wrong decision, but he gets right up there and says the Supreme Court has spoken, it's the law of the land, and I now wish a great stewardship on the president-elect. Hillary Clinton said how hard this was, but on the other hand, we don't only respect the tradition of the peaceful transition of power, we cherish it. The only other time this happened, except for 2020, was in 1860. And what Lincoln said 1860 was about was the Democratic South had lost the election to the Republicans, and they were unwilling to accept that loss. So what did they do? They seceded from the Union. And he said, if a democracy can allow that to happen, then democracy is an absurdity. And I would never have imagined that for the first time since then, we would have a president who didn't say, okay, I feel bad, I lost, it hurts, but I accept this tradition.
Okay, so why do 70+ million people not only accept that, but are enamored of the man who did what you just described?
Well, in part because the same thing is happening now that was happening in the 1850s. In the 1850s, you had a media that was not a generalized media. If you came from a Whig party or the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, that was the only way you got your news. So, for example, suppose Lincoln is at a debate with Stephen Douglas, and Douglas, the paper, the Democratic paper, say he was so great, he was carried out on, no, the Republican paper would say that Lincoln was so great, carried out on the arms of his supporters. Democratic paper would say he was so terrible, he fell on the floor and he had to be dragged out. So truth was at issue then, and that was part of the problem. Truth is at issue now. People don't believe that that election was lost. They think somehow that Mr. Trump is standing on their side. There's a sense of grievance about America, and he's allowing himself to be the person who talks about that. And we have to understand that somehow in order to heal. Eventually, it's going to take a long time to heal from this. We have to figure out how to knit the country back together again.
Do you think we will heal from this?
We have before. I mean, this is what, as a historian, the great thing that history provides is perspective and solace and knowing that we're in tough times now. We've been in really, really, really tough times before. It was much worse in the Civil War. It was worse in the early Depression. It was worse in the early days of World War II when they thought that Hitler would conquer all of Western Europe. And the thing is, the people living then, they didn't know how it was going to end. We know now that the Civil War ends with the Union restored. We know that the Depression came to an end with the mobilization for the war. We know the Allies won world. They didn't know that. We don't know how this is going to end. But somehow, the combination of we've got to get people back into public life. Public life was an honorable thing to do in the 1960s. We need to have more people of character entering public life. Nothing is more important than character. You have to have a person with humility, with empathy, with resilience, with accountability, with responsibility, with ambition for something larger than themselves. And we need those kind of people to be entering. And that's why we have to hope that young people will believe in the system enough. They don't trust the system anymore, enough to enter it, because that's us. We are the government. Unless we're in it, then who else is in it?
How do you restore that trust with young people? We're talking to Doris Kearns Goodwin, obviously, by the way. How do you reestablish that bond of trust with young voters, with young people?
I think the only way you do it is get young people to start working in their local areas, as journalists or as people that are working on projects in the state areas. Maybe it's not going to happen at the national level. Sometimes I think I'd love to see a national service program if I had one thing to do.
Too.
If you bring kids from high school and they have a year and they go from the west to the east or the north to the south or a farm country to a city, and then they have a common mission to accomplish. I mean, this is what the military does so well. My son will say, having been in Iraq and Afghanistan because of joining after 9/11, that nothing will make him prouder than having had a platoon of people from different classes, religions, parties, and pulling them together for a common enemy, for a common cause, not just against a common enemy.
I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but I've said so many times on the radio that until maybe, I don't know, a few years back, I used to think we make a lot of mistakes in the United States. We do things wrong. There's corruption. There's, all these errors. But eventually, we'll do the right thing. And I've stopped feeling that in the last few years. And when I was reading your book, I think of these giants of the Senate, the Mike Mansfields and the Everett Dirksen, and how people not that there weren't scoundrels, but there seemed to be just more integrity, a sense of shame, a sense of you just can't go out. I know you talked about people lying and the truth being at odds, but people just getting on television over and lying, and that they know that they're lying. Something's happened.
Well, you wonder whether or not it takes so much now to run for office. You know that you're going to have to raise a lot of money. You know your private life is going to be exposed. You know that you're going to be under attack, terrible attack, untruthful attack. And it may be that lots of people don't want to do it. And then they look at Washington, well, what fun is that to be down there when they can't accomplish anything? So somehow there are generations, I think, that go into public life. And that's what you need. We had rendezvous with destiny in World War II. We had it at the turn of the 20th century. Lincoln was told he was a liberator. He said, don't call me that. It was the anti-slavery movement that did it all, and the Union soldiers. So we've just got to hope that somehow there'll be a wave of people that think, and maybe not at the national level first, maybe it'll be local, maybe it'll be school boards, maybe it'll be cities, but then they get that sense of what it feels like to make something happen, even if it's something small in your own city, or if this national service program could work. You know, David McCullough, the historian's grandson, is working on the American Exchange, a miniature version of that, just taking kids from high school for a week from one place to another, and then they go back to that other person's place, and then they communicate with each other after they learn to feel what the other people are feeling. Teddy Roosevelt said the greatest danger to democracy would be if people in different sections, regions, and parties begin to view each other as the other rather than as common American citizens. And that's where we're at today, so we've got to break that somehow.
You know, one last thing from me, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and actually we wish you would stay for the next couple of weeks.
Well, I'm here. Is there a pillow back here?
We'll get you one, trust me. I don't know if you saw the interview that Ben Smith, who was the former media columnist for the New York Times, did with Joey Kahn running the Times. And one of the questions he asked him, Ben Smith asked him recently, why don't you see your job as we've got to stop Donald Trump? And Kahn said what one would expect, which was we have to discuss the policy issues, the differences. It's not our job. What is the media's job when, again, a candidate is running who I think you can credibly say, even if you're the New York Times, attempted to overthrow the government of the United States? What balance should the media find in covering this campaign and covering Donald Trump?
I think the most important thing is the last thing you said, somebody who attempted to overthrow the United States government that way. I think that's much more important than any of these other trials that are going on right now. I mean, that's a centerpiece, what happened there. And I thought wrongly after January 6th that the country would change its mind and that they would understand, but then it was made to seem as if it was something other than what it really was. I thought when the hearings took place that was going to be it. Maybe the election campaign will be a time. I think that's what should be focused on. It's the most important thing, that's outside the realm of normal discourse in our country. And the rest of the stuff in terms of the sex, and I much more care about that than anything else.
So,
I don't mean in general.
No, I understand.
Okay.
I just went around all day just thinking about January 6th.
So one last thing for me. We've got Trump and Biden and RFK Jr. with the dead worm in his head running for president.
Feel free to comment on that, Doris. Go ahead.
And a lot of the polls, Trump and Biden are neck and neck, and most all the polls they're neck and neck. One's a little ahead there, one's a little not ahead there. So a lot of us, and I'm one of them, are really concerned that if Trump does win, this is could be the end of the American experiment here, given what he could do unleashed in a second term. Am I wrong?
Well, first of all, I think the worrisome thing is what he's already said he would do in the second term. We know he'll go after his enemies, he'll be dictator for a day, etc. But there's still checks and balances in the system. The citizenry, I still think, let's just wait and see what happens during the election when we really, really focus. And people go into that voting booth and they decide who they want to be president. I'm not sure that these polls mean what they say. I still have a feeling that when you look at the independents, when you look at the people who really voted for Nikki Haley after she was no longer on there, that it's not maybe as close as it seems to be. I don't think it would be at all close if we didn't have the Electoral College and things like that, because the overwhelming majority of the people, when you look at them, what do they care about? They care about climate change. They care about gun safety. They care about a woman's right to choose. And those are the major issues that are on one side, and the other side is different from that, but different in an even deeper way, as you say. And so just let's see if we can trust the American people when it comes down to it.
We're going to play that clip nonstop. So before you go, actually, we now know what Dick Goodwin did for you. What do the Red Sox do for you?
Oh, my God.
Oh, the Red Sox.
What do they do? The exultation When was it the Ken Burns? Were we
Yeah,
the
Ken Burns.
thing? What's with you? And
Well,
what is it?
Well, no, wait. First, I started as a Brooklyn Dodger fan, right?
I know that.
I love them, and then they abandoned me, and then I come up here, and I fall in love with the Red Sox, and year after year after year, they almost always win, and then year after year, they lose. And then finally, they win. And now, at my age, even though people get mad at them if they're not doing well on a particular summer, I still just dream about 2004, 2013. It was the best thing in the world to finally win. I don't think it would have been as much fun if we hadn't lost for such a period of time. It was a great, great day. Nothing to be compared. I used to think maybe it's not as much fun to be a Yankee fan. You win every year. You don't cherish it as much. I don't know. Now it might be nice to have it every year, but I think nothing will beat that. We were all together.
On her face.
Oh,
That's
it's the
pretty
best.
Great.
David Ortiz for president.
It's our effing city. It absolutely is. Doris Kearns Goodwin, this was a total joy, and the book is spectacular.
Oh, I thank you so much. It's the best to be with you. You guys are the best.
We love
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with author, historian, Pulitzer Prize winner Doris Kearns Goodwin. Her latest best-selling book, #1 on the New York Times and Washington Post and everywhere else, is an unfinished love story, a personal history of the 1960s. We didn't get to talk about it much, but I loved all the details about your love story and your life up in Concord. That was very lovely. Doris Kearns Goodwin is going to be the First Parish Church in Cambridge tonight at 7 o'clock for Harvard Bookstore event in conversation with Beth Lasky. For more information, go to harvard.com/events. That's harvard.com/events. Doris Kearns Goodwin, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Up next, we're going to talk with GBH's Jared Bowen. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH.
I'm Judy Ewell in for Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, pro-Palestinian students at MIT are protesting this morning's clear-out of the school's Gaza encampment. Meantime, Harvard is starting to hand down suspensions for students taking part in their encampment. Plus, Somerville Porch Fest is tomorrow. We'll have a preview. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Atlantic Design Center by Eldridge Lumber and Hardware, committed to helping you achieve your vision for a new kitchen or bathroom and guiding you from design to completion, with showrooms in York and Portland, Maine. AtlanticDesignCTR.com. And Johnson & Wales University, providing students with hands-on learning, industry-experienced faculty, and engaging internships. You can discover more at jwu.edu.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan and Jim Browdy live from the library, streaming on youtube.com/GBH News. We're now joined by the poor guy who has to follow Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Hey, it's an honor.
What a sad, sad job that is. That would be Jared Bowen. He is GBH News Executive Arts Editor, host of The Culture Show. It airs daily at 2 o'clock right here on 89.7. And its Friday Week in Review program will be airing from right here in this very studio. So if you're here, please stick around. And if you're not, come on by. Hello, Jared Bowen.
Hello.
Hello,
What do you think of her?
Bowen.
Is she like...
Yeah.
Oh, she's incredible.
She is just
She is a
incredible.
national treasure.
She is there's really nobody, it's rare that you ever say about anybody, there's nobody like him or her. There's nobody like Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's just, It's an otherworldly experience, to use a word.
And she's very nicely signing autographs for people on the books, for people that brought their books.
Well, they're big fans. In any case, Jared, nice to see you.
I didn't get her to sign my book. Sorry about that. I'll do that later.
I think you know people.
Okay. So, Frank Stella, abstract expressionism, modern American art giant, died at 87. Give people a brief synopsis of what his contributions meant to the art world.
Yeah, he was a minimalist who became a maximalist and grew up here in Malden, Massachusetts. Went to Andover, to Phillips Academy in Andover, and had a very formative experience at the Addison Gallery of American Art that just changed the stratosphere. But he has a massive legacy in the art world, and it was a huge loss, even at 87, to lose him last week.
I know you're going to talk about him on the Culture Show. I just have one. I've gotten some feedback lately. They've been too negative about great artists. And I have to say, I'm looking at his early stuff, which was the revolutionary stuff, which is black lines on a white background. Okay, can you help?
Yeah, explain it.
Help me out a little bit? I'm looking at him right now. Can you help? Why was that as revolutionary as all the experts say?
As Frank Stella said, you see what you see. And
what do you see?
If you're up close to those works, as I spent some time with him at the Addison Gallery in 2017.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot about this on the Culture Show coming up, but he pointed out that if you look at those lines up close, they're not straight lines, they're not perfect lines, that you see the artist's hands in them, there is a wave to them, there is an energy to them, and he was somebody who had done something that had really never come before. So there's that engagement of just being in a space, seeing disruption coming out of the abstract expressionist movement and doing something we hadn't experienced.
I accept that. We'll be listening at 2 o'clock.
Okay, we're going to play a little clip now from
here she goes.
the Challengers trailer. This is this new movie about this, Meredith Goldstein says it's not a love triangle, it should be a love square, but we'll explain that in a moment. No, love square.
Square?
Yeah, what she says, it's a love square, but she says a rectangle, actually, so it could be both, Jim.
Okay.
But anyway, this is this moment when the star, Tashi Duncan's played by, I always mispronounce this. Can you say it for me, please?
I don't know how to say it either.
Zendaya.
Thank you, Zoe.
When played by Zendaya, and the whole tennis career changes. Here it is.
You think that tennis is about expressing yourself, doing your thing. But you don't know what tennis is.
What is it? Tashi Duncan, she's in another league. You were incredible today. To have a fashion line, foundation, she's gonna turn a whole family into millionaires.
Okay, we can talk about the movie, but I think we have to talk about the tennis court, too, that Meredith Goldstein wrote about. Tell us.
So the movie was shot here in Boston. First, I will talk about the movie first, which is I love Luca Guadagnino's films. He did Call Me By Your Name. He did I Am Love, The Bigger Splash. He is somebody who gives us deep deliveries into personal behavior and personal love and connections and beauty. And you see all of this come to the fore in this movie, which is essentially about a threesome, but not in the most salacious way, although it certainly veers there.
Too bad.
So you have Zendaya, who is a emerging tennis pro, and she comes across these two young men who are friends. This is very early on in their careers because we find this film bounce back and forth in time. And the two guys have a friendship, but there's definitely a chemistry there. We don't know, is it a competitive chemistry? Is it just, we're two young guys who've bonded? And she starts to upend that as she comes into the picture. And then we follow them, again, back and forth in time as she ends up marrying one of the guys and wants to see him become a tennis pro. She becomes injured, so she can't do it herself. And the other guy comes back into the picture, Josh O'Connor, who played Charles in The Crown. And so we see this triangulation go back and forth and back and forth. And it doesn't get much more deeper than that, except it's super fun, super enjoyable, and there's a lot of heat and steam.
Yeah.
What
so
does
it's
that mean?
You give it a thumbs up, the movie.
I give it a thumbs up.
Okay.
Give us an example of the heat and steam, just so people understand. I mean, what are we
Well,
talking
there's a
about?
scene that everybody talks about at the beginning of the film, toward the beginning of the film, when they are the young teenagers and they're sitting on a bed and she manipulates them.
Oh, yeah.
She manipulates the entire temperature of the room.
Yeah, I saw that in the trailer, I believe.
did? Yes.
Yes. Of course, it's a toss-up. Do you go see that this weekend, or do you go see Ryan Gosling in the new movie with Emily Blount? I don't know.
Or you can have a twofer.
You can have a twofer. That's exactly, or a threefer.
Or a threefer. In this
exactly,
case
as
of
a
this.
challenge
Thank
is.
you very much.
But the funny story behind this is apparently this is all at the Wedgwood Club in Westminster was the tennis court that filmed at. Bedford, excuse me, in Bedford, Massachusetts, and that's what Meredith Goldstein wrote a piece about, is how they scouted around for the right tennis court. And there's 2 tennis courts, right? This one and the one in Wheaton.
Yeah, there's one that plays another small role, but the one in Bedford is where most of this happens. Because what has happened, the reason the 3 are brought back together is because the one Zendaya is married to needs to get back in the game, so she puts him into this tournament. It's supposed to be set in New Rochelle, but it's all shot here in Boston. And then Josh O'Connor's character shows up, and he's going to upend that by bringing all the past back to the fore. So we keep going back and forth with this match. But you'll also see the street bar at the Newbury Hotel, the bar at the Ritz-Carlton plays a pretty big role. So there are lots of identifiable Boston places, even though, including the tennis court.
By the way, we mispronounced. Not only do we not know how to pronounce Zendaya, when we pronounce Zendaya, it's not Zendaya, it's Zendaya. So we apologize to Zendaya and her family.
Okay.
And her 2 lovers. In the, or whoever they are in the movie.
And to Timothée Chalamet, because she's really good in that movie, too.
I can't pronounce his name either. So can we talk about some things happening in Boston? This Boston Ballet Spring Experience thing, which is there till May 19th, sounds pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, we have 3 relatively new works. One world premiere, it's called The Space Between, and this is by the choreographer Ken Osola, who has choreographed all around the world. He was a major influence in the Netherlands Dance Theater, which is a huge ballet company in Europe. And this is kind of he said he was inspired by Michelangelo's sculptures called Prisoners, and it's really it felt like this ethereal experience where you're kind of getting into people's heads and how they contort and move back and forth as personalities. Then we move on to Blake Works 3, The Bar Project by William Forsythe. I just saw this last night. It is exceptional. You have this very Spartan stage, black costumes, striking light wherever you need it, but you have that feeling when you see light streak across something or something moves so fast you just see that blur of light. That's how you experience the dancers here. Every time the leg moves with such speed, every time the arm moves with such speed, it is like a comet. It's such a streak, and there is such precision. William Forsythe is one of the greatest choreographers working today, if not the greatest. And so we see that all come to the fore in this piece, which people were on their feet as soon as it was over. It was incredible.
Really?
Yeah. And the last piece, which I have to admit I've seen before, I didn't see last night, is Bella Figora, which is just another really gorgeous piece, almost in the same way that William Forsythe's piece brings all of this power and energy and lightning. This slows us down to understand the beauty of the human body.
Why didn't you see it?
Because I have a show to do in the morning.
Oh, okay.
And I'm very familiar with that piece. I've seen it a number of times.
Okay, we're talking to Jared Bowen from the Culture Show.
You know what's
2
amazing?
o'clock here live at the library. Yes.
You will see people that former ballerinas, ballet dancers, well into their 60s, 70s, and 80s, who still look like ballet dancers. I mean, it is incredible how because they keep at it all those years, and their bodies are just unbelievable.
And how they carry themselves.
Yeah, how they carry
walk.
themselves.
Well, I think, especially if you do this from childhood and it's all you know, hopefully well into your life, into your 30s. Speaking of which, John Lamb, this will be the final performance. He's a principal dancer at Boston Ballet, an extraordinary dancer. This is his final program. He's going out on top. And somebody who has used his body forever but knows that there is a limit, but now he's going to go off to do other artistic projects. But somebody who carries it from childhood up into dance training and on the stage, you just can't abandon that.
Yeah, you can tell the way people walk. I remember somebody that I like to do yoga classes.
I was just going to say, you carry yourself very well, and I would say it's yoga, right?
Oh my goodness, thank you.
You're always upright.
But I'm not. Well, that's one of the things. But you have to put your shoulder blades together, right? Yeah. Which is hard for women to do.
Sure.
But anyway, I saw this guy walking in one day, and I said, oh my God, this guy's. And I asked him after class. I said, you? And of course, he was with the Boston Ballet. They just look different, and and they walk differently.
Tell you, Matt, we're doing an event. We're emceeing an event for this fabulous
Yes.
group in Newton called Silent Spring. It deals with environmental issues, like right in your house you don't even know about, and PFAS and that sort of stuff. And there are two young people who are walking ahead of us to the cocktail party before the
Walking
event.
up the stairs.
And we follow
We're
them
like
all over the building.
stalkers.
And just because of how they were walking. And it turns out it was two young Russian dancers, pre-Ukraine, by the way. So
Look at the way they're walking up the stairs.
It was
Look at the way they take a
unbelievable.
corner.
It was exactly every move they made was just incredible.
I know. It's really an inspiration. Anyway, tell us about Ethiopia at the Crossroads in Peabody, Essex.
This is a first of its kind exhibition, which is pretty remarkable given the history of Ethiopia, and that all comes to the fore here because we have 2,000 years of history, which is pretty pure in the sense that Ethiopia, sadly, good for Ethiopia, but sadly for the rest of Africa, is the only African country that was never colonized. And so there's this major show that's been organized because the Peabody Essex Museum has a pretty extensive collection themselves of coins, of processionals, of metalwork. So we get a whole sense of how cultures lived, how they rose, how they worshipped, what devotion was like, what they wore, how they carried themselves, what they carried. We have baskets and, as I say, staffs for processionals, and this is all mixed in with contemporary art. So you have contemporary artists, Ethiopian artists, either working there or around the world now, like Julia Moretu, who's a major art world star, looking at the culture and what it means to them. There are some especially poignant pieces of women looking at the culture and their place in it and depicting themselves in that place. I thought this was a really, really extraordinary show. They also have this little treasure that I think a lot of people will recognize. The cover art to Paul Simon's Graceland came from a little piece that is in the Peabody Essex Museum's collection that apparently somebody associated with Paul Simon.
Of what?
Obviously years ago. It's of St. George.
Wow.
Saw it and then put it on the album, and now because works like this can only be shown every so often, and then have to go back into the archives for years and years and years because they're so susceptible to light damage. So this is the first time in a long time it's been out on view. And by the way, he's about to be here for one of the commencements.
Paul Simon, I saw.
Yeah.
I saw.
So maybe he'll go visit his own piece at the
Is he going
Peabody
to be
Essex
a
Museum.
speaker?
Yeah.
He is. He's a commencement speaker at some. I can't remember.
Know that.
One of the
which
music
school,
schools.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, that's July 7th at the Peabody Essex. We have a minute for another July 7th event.
Yeah.
Or up to July 7th.
Yeah. Real quick, the Worcester Art Museum.
Yeah, the Worcester Art Museum has this exhibition called New Terrain, 21st Century Landscape Photography. And I thought this was a wonderful, relatively small show, small in the greatest sense, because you can really spend a lot of time in it and see a lot of different work. But it's not photography as you would expect, where people are taking pictures and they go up on the gallery walls, but it's all the things that people are doing with photography, like taking a picture of or making a picture of a lake, and then developing that in the lake water, so you get these striations of yellow and red across the landscape, so it looks like it's something.
You developed the photo in the lake?
Yeah, using the lake water.
Oh my God.
There's another who has done a cyanotype of and used ocean water.
I don't know what that is. What does that mean?
This is where you're using sunlight basically to develop and other means to develop. So then you have the sand and the salt and other elements working into the photography. So then it becomes very textural. You have Tabitha Soren, we've talked about before, who took this fabulous photograph of a glacier in Chile and then and then photographed it through an iPad screen so that you get all of the human greasy marks over it. And it looks like it could be part of the texture of the landscape, but it's not. It's the human interaction with it.
Okay, here's my favorite. Lawn chair catapult. Can I put this on the screen?
Well, you can
see
try.
The lawn
Go
chair
ahead.
catapult? They probably can't see it. No,
Hold
it's
it
too
up for a
far
couple
away.
hours and see
it's
if they
too
can.
far away. But it's a great picture of this lawn chair flying through the air. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just a riot.
Well, what's interesting here is they have the first example, we talk a lot about in the show about AI, they have the first example of text to photography AI that was ever made, and this was done about 14 years ago, and there are only a few examples of this, and one of those collections is in the Worcester Art Museum collection.
So are we supposed to not like Ansel Adams anymore, or can we like Ansel Adams?
No,
or not?
but I think we can appreciate other ways to look at certainly he brought us, he catapulted us forward with photography and how we can appreciate it. Now we see what more contemporary artists are doing with it.
That was beautifully put, by the way. So how did it feel?
What's in the culture
How did it
show?
feel going after Doris Kearns Goodwin?
Well, it felt a lot less stressful because who really cares? And
Well, People are still here. No one walked out.
That's
or maybe
true.
a few people walked out, but not that many. What's on the culture show?
We are going to be talking about Eurovision.
The contest, the big singing thing, right?
Yeah.
Yep. We're going to be talking about Zombies in Worcester. That filming is underway right now. I know, right? I
Excuse
saw
me?
it the other day. It was incredible.
What is that?
They're filming Walking Dead in
They are?
Worcester. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So there are zombies walking around by the diners and stuff?
Yep.
You're talking about Frank Stella. I don't know if you know that.
And we're talking about Frank Stella. We'll go much more deeply into Frank Stella's work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you tell that Jared had a really good story to tell about meeting Frank Stella?
He's not gonna tell
and he
us.
wouldn't share it with us, which really aggravated the hell out of me,
No,
I should say.
that's the way to go.
You got to save the goods.
You keep it for the culture show, Jared. That's okay.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Right here.
Right after us.
Nice to see you, Jared
That's right.
Bowen.
Okay,
Thank
to
you
see
very
you.
much, Jared Bowen. Jared Bowen is GBH News Executive Arts Editor and host of The Culture Show, which airs every day right after the 2 o'clock news. It's going to be right here, airing at the library. So if you're here and you can, stick around. It's really fun. 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. So it is, of course, Mother's Day. And we're going to talk about what mothers really want on Mother's Day. It's a time we consider perhaps skipping the breakfast in bed and getting the maple syrup all over the sheets and over mom, and actually giving our mothers and the women in our lives a break on Mother's Day. That's next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio at 89.7. As I said, we are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library.
This week on Under the Radar with Callie Crossley, 70 years ago, the Supreme Court overturned legal school segregation in a landmark ruling sending black kids to white schools. 7 decades later, what is the legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education? That's Under the Radar with me, Callie Crossley, Sunday night at 6 here on 89.7 GBH and the GBH app.
Support for our programs comes from you.
And Dover Rug and Home. Rugs and carpeting for today's lifestyle with in-home rug trial and design consultation. Dover Rug in Natick, Boston, Burlington, and online at doverrug.com. Dover Rug. Rugs and the people who know them. And Bernadine Sung Megason with Compass Real Estate. Serving buyers and sellers throughout Greater Boston. Learn more at homesbybernadine.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie, and we're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. On Monday, we're hoping that Doris Kearns Goodwin comes back. She probably won't, but we're hoping. And whether she does or not, singer-songwriter Rufus Wainwright will join us Monday. He's brilliant. I think he's got a show Friday at City Winery. We have the Attorney General here on at the library on Tuesday the 28th from 11 to 12. And is that it? Yeah, it is. Because this is our last show before Mother's Day, which is Sunday, we wanted to spend the rest of the hour asking all you mothers out there, you don't have to be a mother, but mothers included, what you wish the rest of the world would do for you on Mother's Day. And you have to be honest at 877-301-8970. What does Mother's Day really mean to you? Are you the 1 in 5 mothers who, in a poll we saw, who'd appreciate some time alone this Sunday? That's YouGov, is the pollster. Or maybe you do love cleaning up the kitchen after the mess your kids made, preparing breakfast in bed for you. Are you the kind of mother to say, oh, I don't want to do anything special, and then pull a complete 180 when Sunday rolls around and you expect to be pampered? Maybe, and this is a serious note here, this is one of the most impressive events I've ever been to. This Sunday, like every Mother's Day, is the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. It's looking to raise $600,000 for the mothers and family of children whose lives were taken too soon by violence. It's part of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, which is part of the wonderful work that Tina Cherry does. The gathering, I think, is at 9 a.m. You could Google it at Townfield Park in Dorchester. In any case, 877-301-8970. As a mother, what would you like on Mother's Day? And if you have a mother, or had a mother, or would like to be a mother, how do you feel? What are you giving your mother that will be meaningful? And to quote our friend Michael Norton, an experience is far better than a thing, Marjorie. Is that correct?
Wait
a second. You're a mother.
I am, Jim.
What
yes,
do you
I am.
want for Mother's Day? I just realized that. I knew you were a mother, but I forgot.
Well, I'm doing something with my own daughter who is a mother.
You are?
Yes, we are. We're going out for a nice early dinner.
Oh, that's
nice
really
brunch.
nice.
Yeah, so that'll be nice. But this piece in The Cut, and that's a great website, talks a lot about women's stuff, thecut.com, talks about how this should really be a holiday for the mothers of young kids, because they're the ones that are in the thick of it. They can't get away from these kids. They can't go in the bathroom without the kids following them in. It should be a time to worry about those young kids and give them a break. Maybe have dad take care of the kids, or your significant other take care of the kids, or somebody else take care of the kids, because you can get a break for the kids. And apparently, that's the most popular thing, is to be taken out for drinks or a meal without your kids. This woman is complaining in the story that she says, if you have to worry about your grandmother, then you're going to take the kids, and you're going to get the kids dressed up, you're going to go take them to see your grandmother, and really, grandma, generally speaking, is not in the thick of the raising of the kids anymore. She doesn't need a break. It's
Not
the
what
young
you tell
mothers
me.
that do. Well, a lot of grandmothers do a lot of
like
taking
one I'm
care of
standing across from.
Well, I don't do very much,
Oh,
actually.
whatever.
Anyway, so that's the question. What do you really want for Mother's Day? Should it be about moms with little kids, or should it be about any kind of mom? What do you do about godmothers? What do you do about grandmothers? What do you do about aunts? So they kind of left out because they're not really mothers.
Well, it's not
but they're
Aunt
sort of.
Day. You know what I mean? It's
No,
Mother's
but a lot
Day.
of aunts are very involved with raising their
By the way,
kids, too.
it's a Hallmark thing. I'm not saying it's not significant, but it's a creation of a Hallmark, of a card company. You know
It's a
that.
creation of a card
Listen to
company,
this.
that's right.
I think the answer is quite clear. 62% of mothers of young children in the same poll I mentioned say they have less than an hour a day to themselves. Now, it seems to me, I am not a mother. You are. That the best thing you can do, at least give part of a day where they get a break to just be free themselves, do whatever the hell they want.
Think about this. If you are a mother who works outside the house, lots of people work at home now, but if you work outside the house and your kids are in school or your kids are in daycare or whatever, you're almost never in your house alone anymore, because the kids are always with you. It's a weird experience when you're a mother of young kids to have the house be empty. You never get any time to yourself.
When you were a young mother, do you never duct tape your kids in another room? I don't mean in a way that would be dangerous, but you never did that?
No, I
just
never
to get a
did.
little
Maybe I
piece?
thought about it once or twice, but I never actually did it.
877-301-89. It's essentially all things Mother's Day for the next whatever number of minutes.
Maura from Milford. What do you think, Maura?
Hello, Maura from Milford.
Hi, how are you guys?
Excellent.
I spend Mother's Day doing exactly what I want. This year I'm going shopping to get a few things at IKEA by myself.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the buying yourself part, I assume, is attractive to you, Maura?
It is. Right now I have two 20-somethings at home. One just graduated and one works from home, so it's like I just like a little time to myself.
Yeah.
How do they feel okay? I mean, not that it's their business, it's yours, but how do they feel about you wanting to be by yourself on Mother's Day?
They have no problem. My mother-in-law is still around, so they usually do something with her that day, and I kind of go off and do my own thing.
What do you think of the meatballs at IKEA?
I have gluten intolerance, so I can't even have them.
That is the saddest thing I've ever heard. Hey, Maura, happy Mother's Day. I'm glad you're doing what you want to do. Thanks so much for the call. You ever had the meatballs at IKEA?
Yes, I have.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, they are. They're little ones. They're
little, cheap, plentiful,
They're very
and
good.
delicious.
They're very
Yes,
good.
they
Yeah,
are.
sometimes you can get good stuff at IKEA. People complain they can't always, some of the stuff falls apart, but I've had pretty good experience.
The problem is you can't get out of IKEA.
That's
you
right.
ever try getting
Yeah,
out of
it's like-
IKEA
it's
when you
like
get
a
in
maze.
IKEA?
It's like one of those
exactly, like a corn
husk
thing.
maze
Exactly.
they have at holidays. Katrina from Warwick, Rhode Island. What do you think?
Hey there.
Hi, I'm a first-time caller,
Thank you.
long-time listener. I absolutely love you guys.
Thank you.
So for Mother's Day this year, we're actually, my siblings and I are doing a dinner for my mom on Saturday night because on Sunday my husband's taking me to Boston, just me and him, and we're going to the Bruins game.
Oh, that's really great. That's actually, that's the experience thing versus a thing. So do you worry if that's your Mother's Day thing that they're going to get crushed like they got crushed in Game 2, or does that not matter?
I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit more like game one.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're getting what you want. Katerina, happy Mother's Day to you, too, and thanks so much for your call.
Here's a few good texts.
Yeah.
When my kids were little, 3 kids in 3.5 years, oh my God, my husband would take them out all day and I cleaned the house in peace because cleaning is relaxing for me. I can relate to that. You get everybody out of the house and you can do the cleaning by yourself. Here's Ellen
That's
in
a
Warwick.
hell of a gift. That's beautiful.
Here's Ellen in Warwick, Rhode Island. I used to want the day to myself when my kids were younger. Now that they're pretty much out of the house and living in different time zones, I miss them and would love to be served pancakes in bed with sticky maple syrup.
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of
By the way, that whole idea that you said before, where you read somewhere about, it should especially be for young mothers who are overwhelmed. The beauty, I think, of Mother's Day, at least for the mothers that I am familiar with, is it's also a time because your kids get away from you the older they get. And it's an opportunity to sort of, reminisce and reconnect. And no?
I know, I guess.
Well, you're a good example. Your kids are all in their 30s,
I'm
right?
reminiscing and reconnecting.
Are you
That's
reminiscing
what I'm doing.
or reconnecting?
That's what I'm doing on Sunday.
No, you're not
That's
doing
right.
either.
I'm going to have a nice cocktail and reminisce and reconnect and all that.
You know what? Marjorie would also love to look at some pictures from when her kids were young. Unfortunately, she can't find them. Is that true or is that not true?
Here's another good one.
It is
I
true,
want
trust
everyone
me.
to leave very early in the morning so I can read my book all day alone in a quiet house. Then come home around 3 p.m. and bring her a lobster roll.
That's pretty good. That's actually great.
yeah.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Kim in Italy? Oh, whoa, she just hung up. Sorry about that. Call us back, Kim. Annie and Gardner, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, great topic. I'm paraphrasing a cartoon that I saw, but for Mother's Day, I would like the activism of my youth to not have been in vain.
Oh, wow.
Well, flesh that out a little bit, Annie.
Well, my daughter is an activist, and I'm so proud of her, and that is a Mother's Day gift in and of itself.
Oh.
But I'm just very depressed where things are, especially for women's reproductive rights right now. And that would be the best present of all, to make reproductive rights, part of the Constitution and protected forever.
That's a pretty beautiful message. I hope it happens by next Mother's Day. Annie, thanks for the call. We really appreciate it.
This is from an unhappy mom.
Yeah.
I've asked for years for a weekend at a hotel so I can decompress and rest for a bit. But every Mother's Day, I'm struck down as being selfish because I'm not spending this day with my kids. And so this Sunday, I'll be waking up at 6:30 to bring my son to his baseball games, then having a late lunch with family that I'm not looking forward to at all.
That's beautiful. That's really a lovely thing. Do you not think, I know
There's
this
an
is a
honest
random
woman.
It's a random sample.
Mhm.
Don't you think the consensus so far is I want time by myself?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. I'm back to seeing the grandmas and being okay. Taking the kids to see the grandmas. The kids are both in school now. But when I was little, what this woman says, this is Sarah in Cranston, I wanted time to myself. All I wanted for Mother's Day was to be left in the house alone.
Did you ever have Mother's Day where you were just left alone, or no?
I remember when my kids were little, I remember one time I was in the house alone. My then husband took the kids somewhere, I forget where he took them, and it was unbelievable. I was in the house all alone, like standing there. What do I do now? It was so weird. I think that's a common sensation when your kids are little. You're never in the house alone. Let's go to, is this Kim? Did we just
She's
talk to
originally from New Hampshire. No, we disconnected. She's back. Kim in Italy.
she's back. Okay.
Hi,
in
Kim.
Italy. Hi, Kim.
Why are you in Italy, first of
Hi,
all?
yes.
Why are you there?
I have a vacation home here, an apartment in a medieval town here in Tuscany.
Oh, wow. My
And,
God.
Anyway.
And you're calling us?
I bought it. I am calling you because I'm a long time listener. I love your show. I love you both.
You're great.
And I listen every time, and I simulcast broadcast it when you're live, and I also listen to podcasts as well. Anyway, I just want to say that I met a woman here many years ago who's become like a second mother to me. My mother passed away over 12 years ago, and this woman has become like a second mother to me. She's a wonderful woman. She's going to be 87 this October.
Wow.
And I've taken cooking classes from her.
That's great.
And I'm going to be bringing her a plant on Mother's Day this coming Sunday. She's been like a second mother to me, and she's a wonderful person, extremely well-traveled and knowledgeable, and I just love her to death. So
That's pretty beautiful. You know, Kim, we are willing to reenact a show at a castle in Tuscany if you'd like that. So stay in touch. We are open to anything. Kim, thank you for calling, and happy, I guess, second Mother's Day in your case. Thank you, Kim, for the call. Be well.
You know, I'm getting a lot of emails, or texts, I should say, from mothers who couldn't wait to be alone on Mother's Day when they were young, and now they're all sad because their children are far flung and they wish they could be back to spend some time with them. But listen to this. This is an unusual one. This is from June in Dartmouth. When my kids were young, I would have my husband and kids take me out in a canoe on a lake to see the baby storks in nests in the lake's dead trees. Why were the trees dead in the lake?
Maybe that's where they hang out in their habitat or something.
I don't know. That's something, isn't it?
That's beautiful. By the way, you know, we just talked to Kim, who called us from Italy.
Yeah.
Nicole, our colleague, she was in Greece last week. She said, I admit I tuned in just for the puppy killer segment last week from Greece. That, of course, would be Governor Nome from South Dakota. I wouldn't have missed that, Nicole, either, no matter where I was.
Yeah.
877-301-8970. We're sort of doing a Mother's Day preview, tribute, whatever kind of thing.
You know, someone is just saying, too, that a challenge for Mother's Day is for those of us whose mothers are gone. And this person says they dig out old photos from my youth and remember times we shared. Anna Quinlan used to be a great columnist for the, she writes novels now, but she was a great columnist for the New York Times. Actually, the first woman columnist on the op-ed page. Yeah, and she actually wrote about something that the men said no one was interested in, her being a young mother with a family, and of course she became a superstar. In any case, her mother died when she was young, and she wrote a great column about being without a mother on Mother's Day and going out and how you resented, really, the other young mothers that were out with their mothers on Mother's Day, and she felt bad that she couldn't have that experience anymore because her mother had passed away. So anyway, there's a lot of, I think, sadness for mothers on Mother's Day when their mother isn't there anymore. Katie in the car, thank you for calling.
Hi, Katie in the car.
Hey there.
Hi.
So I have several months. This is my first Mother's Day as a mother, and I'm really looking forward to spending the day doing something fun with him. But also, my mom has Alzheimer's, and so we're going, me and my sister, the baby, and my mom, we're going to the zoo together, and just looking forward to really having that time together that's set aside from work and set aside from daycare and everything else that has to get done.
Well, that's pretty good. Happy first Mother's Day, and what you're doing is actually pretty great. I hope it's good for all of you. Katie, thank you for sharing that with us. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970. What are you laughing about?
My Mother's Day feels like a sham. I will be at my daughter's dance recital on Sunday morning, followed by another child's sporting event all afternoon, followed by an hours-long drive to see my own elderly mother late in the day, like any other weekend, but with the added pressure that we're supposed to feel grateful for all of this. And who's the person that was somebody just said they were going to spend the whole day shuttling their kids back and forth to baseball games and soccer games and practice for the above, and that Mother's Day was not going to be much of anything. Oh, here's one for you, Jim.
What is it?
For Mother's Day, I would like the media to correctly call the Trump trial an election interference trial.
Oh, that would really make me so happy as a mother, yes.
Okay.
It would.
Happy Mother's Day,
By the way,
Jim.
can I say on that note, I know this is, you brought it up, or that texter brought it up, not only is CNN, which is our network of choice, doing hush, they're doing it right now. This week in Trump hush money trial. You know who else does hush money? National Public Radio. Our own place. You listen to the news in the morning.
Know.
It's a hush money trial, which is not what it is.
Yeah, that you should call somebody,
Okay, get
Jim,
over it, Jim. I'm not calling
care
anybody.
Okay. Oh, you know, this one says she's not a mother, but she's a 3.5-month-old puppy, and she feels like she's in her 60s, and she is exhausted, and she can only imagine that the mother of young human beings must be going through when they cannot stop ever. I have empathy with you, though. A young puppy, I remember when I had a puppy, and I felt like, oh my God, it was like a fourth kid.
Harry the P, best dog from C to C?
Best dog from C to C, yeah. You're out, all the time with the dog.
We have time for one more quick one.
Jeannie from North Attleboro. Hi, Jeannie.
Hi.
Hi.
When my children were young, they're in their 30s now.
Yeah.
I hated going out to eat, and because it's crazy, it gets hot, it's a long line, and but my husband started packing up picnic lunch. I could see the kids. He would take them away from where I was, I would bring a big fat novel, and that was my day. I could see them, but I didn't have to deal with them. I didn't have to clean up afterwards.
That should be the slogan of Mother's Day. I can
Seen but
see
not
'em.
heard.
That's beautiful. Jeannie,
Yeah, that
thanks
was
for
a
the
good
call.
one.
We appreciate it.
That was a good one. Okay, we do wish everybody a happy Mother's Day. There was
We
a
do.
theme here, I think.
Happy Mother's Day to you,
thank
Marjorie
you, that
Egan.
that the mothers with young children want them just to leave her alone, get out of Dodge and leave her alone. And the mothers of older children wish that their older children were younger again so they could be with them. Life is just not fair, Jim. Right?
You know what a nice Mother's Day gift is?
What?
An unfinished love story.
Yeah.
It's really
It's
a great,
yeah.
really, we're not exaggerating. It is a spectacular book and will make you feel better than you probably feel about the state of the world.
Yeah, we didn't get into it, but there's a lot in there for Mother's Day about the state of their
I know, their
romance too,
relationship
which
is
is
good.
was
It's
great
beautiful.
too.
I agree.
Anyway, we are done. Thank you very much for
We
listening to
are.
another edition of Boston Public Radio. Thank you for people that came down.
What's interesting? What's going on around town? We're talking all things arts and culture on The Culture Show, next on GBH 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you. And Mass General Cancer Center, dedicated to providing the latest therapies and cancer specialists who are experienced in your cancer. When you hear the word cancer, their team is ready. Learn more at massgeneral.org/cancer. High School Quiz Show is celebrating 15 years of sharp minds, devoted fans, and big wins. Join new host Joe Hansen and catch the semifinal of High School Quiz
to expand their current home, which involves demolishing Monroe's former home.
Are movies getting too long? Back in the day, the average movie barely exceeded 2 hours. Today, we typically see blockbusters like Avatar or Oppenheimer that clock in at 3 hours or even more.
A ghastly sight in Worcester, a transformed Norwich street crawling with zombies.
I'm scared of this movie because it's so scary, and I'm scared of zombies.
Well, who isn't? As you just heard, amid war, you can't have pop without politics. Pro-Palestinian protesters are denouncing Israel's advancement to Eurovision's grand final. The artist Frank Stella, a Malden native and the minimalist who morphed into a maximalist and an art world giant, has died. Plus, while artificial intelligence creates deep fakes, it's also used to spot fake masterpieces. Then, some like it not, Marilyn Monroe's home could be demolished if the current homeowners have their way. And Worcester is a wasteland for The Walking Dead, that is, as zombies stagger through downtown for filming. But first up, Eurovision. It is campy, it is kitschy, it is over the top with acts like Bambi Thug and Baby Lasagna baked in. But the pop song contest is not without political friction as pro-Palestinian protesters crank up the volume to 11 over Israel advancing to the grand final. We'll get to that in a moment, but first let's just talk about what Eurovision is, because it is Eurovision. The U.S. doesn't get to participate except through an app now. We can have our say in who wins, but this is a long-time contest that saw the rise of ABBA and other groups where each country chooses its own act. They move on through the semifinals and into the grand final happening this weekend, and 162 million people watch.
It's utterly amazing to me. Why?
Oh, no.
It's been going on since 1956. I'm all about cultural history, so that's great. But we've just been listening to the contestants this year, and it's all the same, Jared, with a few maybe twists on bad rap in different versions.
There's a lot of bad rap, yeah.
I'm puzzled. I mean, it's a spectacle, which is interesting. I mean, you had an interesting thought about the spectacle nature of it.
Yeah, so I was saying, I sort of came to this and I was like, I'm going to listen to some of the songs that are entered in this year's Eurovision, and to just sit and listen to them is not the best experience. It's not the best listening experience I've ever had. But I will say I also watched some of this. So the streaming network Peacock is making this available to folks here in the U.S., so we're able to watch it if you have Peacock or access to Peacock. So I watched some of it. And frankly, when you see the performances, you get the sense that like that is as much a part of this as the music is.
Oh, totally.
The costumes, the sets, they are so over the top. They are so outrageous. And it is definitely a better experience watching than it is listening to this music on its own.
Well, let's give our listeners a little taste. So here's the Netherlands submission for this year's Eurovision Song Contest. This is Joost Klein performing his song Euro Papa, a song lauding the open borders of the European Union. Again, let's take a listen.
Knows it. The crowd knows it.
I mean, how could you not love it? You add the visuals to this, you see all of Europe coming together, except for when they're not, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But this is a pretty extraordinary thing. I think in much the same way I love Las Vegas for just the spectacle, just to people watch, just to see what's happening. This is why I love
But the entertainment is good in Las Vegas.
Well, it's gotten better.
It depends. It depends on where you go.
But I'm just talking about the spectacle that is Las Vegas when you step back from it after a couple days and you think, what did I just experience? And did that all just really happen? I think that's what you find with Eurovision.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's outlandish. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And of course, there's that. If people haven't seen it, there's that movie that was made
with Will Ferrell.
Oh, that's right.
That's
that
kind of a send up on the whole
that's
idea of what Eurovision is and everything. I mean, I think it's cool that they've been doing this since 1956.
Mm-hmm.
I think and even though it hasn't produced a ton of superstars. I mean, we talked about ABBA was sort of launched from it. France Gall is another name, Belgian, who sort of had some success afterwards. But it's not really a huge driver of like worldwide success. It really is kind of, it's like big local, but it's like a little local music festival competition thing, and I think it's kind of neat that they do it and that they've been doing it for so long.
In talking about them doing it for so long, and decade after decade after decade, we've seen how history has played out in all of those decades, and this is where it becomes interesting because Eurovision has claimed that this is a politically free zone, that they don't want politics to enter here. Of course, we have seen Turkey invading Cyprus. We've seen the fall of the Berlin Wall. 2 years ago, Russia was excluded, and now they are not allowed into the competition at all for the invasion of Ukraine. So this has all come to the fore this year because there are massive protests happening, and I know you were able to get an on-the-ground feel for this, Edgar, but massive protests, pro-Palestinian protests happening because Israel has been allowed to proceed into this year's contest and has actually moved on to the grand final.
Yeah, I mean, as it just so happens in a very random string of events, I know somebody who's in the police department in Malmö, in Sweden, which is where this is happening, and I reached out to her and I said, kind of how is it going over there? And she said there's nothing really huge to say. She said they've been very prepared. They've spent a lot of time preparing for this, that there is a lot of security around anything having to do with this, but there have been protests. There are more protests and even bigger ones expected to come on Saturday, tomorrow, which is the final. So they said they're ready for it. Doesn't sound like it's been a huge deal, but it is a deal. It's happening.
Right. And we should have to point out in 2022, Ukraine won, and that was very much a political decision, I think. I mean, the song was...
It certainly was not a musical decision.
The song was what the song was, but everybody was very enthusiastic to want to support Ukraine's cause, and so therefore that singing group won. And so we have to just note that all of their saying it's politically free, it's never really been politically free. It's always been fraught with something, and they came really out of the box in 2022 with Ukraine, and now for them to pretend, if some are, that this kind of protest, pro-Palestinian, and the protest about the Israeli entrant is something new. Oh my God, it's just not the case.
Well, and to some degree, you can understand them not wanting to have this be an overtly political contest, especially since you have all of Europe participating here, and we know the wide political spectrum. But at the same time, we recognize that art is fueled by politics. Art addresses and answers politics, especially in song, as we've seen in this country, dating back to the 1960s and on forward, and of course even before that. So it seems a fool's errand to try to ignore this.
Well, even just look at the song that you were just playing, that we listened to, and you said this is a song that's about how great it is that you can move freely across the EU, across borders. That is inherently a political statement in and of itself, right there. So yeah, you can't divide politics from this. But I think this is at its best, you figure this is an idea that's a little bit like the Olympics in that you want to say. You sort of, I understand why they say this is not overtly political, but you do have to allow the space for the fact that it will be in some ways political, and you hope that in an environment like that, it's done in the most peaceful way and the most constructive way.
And the most equitable way.
And that's where it's been a little tricky, right?
Well, moving back to this country, a big loss this week with the death of Steve Albini, who was a pretty extraordinary producer, although didn't want to be known and remembered as such. Always wanted to be just a sound engineer for all he did in rock and punk and metal, Nirvana, the Pixies, PJ Harvey, Jesus Lizard. So many people attribute their success and their sound to his excellence in the recording studio, which he tried to keep as basic as possible. It sounds like was just an amazing figure.
Yeah, I mean, he was an enormous figure, certainly from the late 80s through the mid 90s in that whole alternative music explosion that kind of happened across the United States and then really across the world. He was really a leading figure in that, and not just in the sound of these things, but also there was this punk rock ethos that had sort of grown up and had become a part of this world. And one of the things that punk rock ethos was about was so-called authenticity, right? This idea that you're doing music because you're feeling the music, it's not about the money, etc. One thing I would point to, if anybody's interested, you can listen to the music that he produced, and a lot of it's great. But do you know this website, Letters of Note? Have you ever checked this out? So it's a fantastic website, and basically what they do is they, each day or whatever, they put a letter up there that somebody of some note sent to somebody else, and it's just letters from one person to another. And they have one the letter that Steve Albini wrote to Nirvana when they asked him, if he'll produce In Utero, which was going to follow up Nevermind, which was like a huge success, right? And he says in it, I do not want to take a royalty on any record. No points, period. I think paying a royalty to a producer or engineer is ethically indefensible. The band writes the songs, the band play the music, it's the band's fans who buy the record. He goes on to say, I would like to be paid like a plumber. I do the job, and you pay me what it's worth. It's that kind of ethos that I think people really responded to with him.
Before we get to you, Callie, so we hear have a little understanding of the sound and how he entered into this realm. Here's the original Steve Albini mix of Nirvana's classic track, Heart-Shaped Box, off their 93 record, In Utero. One of the things I loved reading was that he would say, look, no EQ. This was all analog.
Yeah. I mean, I am very impressed by his saying that he wasn't going to take royalties, and that I considered him to be a true independent in that way. He had even formed his own studio. So, he had many opportunities in which he could have had multiple streams of revenue, as we say. I'm also very just amused, I guess, and interested in the fact that they did some, because of the independence and the punk rockiness of it, did some songs that today, we have to reconsider about the titles. And he himself said, hey, we were a little out there, and I agree that maybe it was a little bit too much. We can't say them, and this is a family program, the titles of those shows. So I appreciate the fact that he went back and said that. But, hey, I'm thinking of him because it feels to me that we have discussed, even in the short time this show has been on, a number of really fine guitarists, particularly, and other musicians who've just recently died fairly young, who had such an impact in this area. It seems a little odd.
Well, it's the rock and roll lifestyle, as they say. You kind of like living hard and everything like that. I think about, if you want to think about his legacy, I also think about, and I know he says the band makes the records, but the sound of the Pixies in particular, which was a Boston-based band, and the sound that they crafted and his part in that sound. A lot of people look at them in the 90s like was said about the Velvet Underground in the 60s, which is they didn't sell a ton of records, but almost everybody who bought those records started their own band. And so that's how the influence lived on, and I think he's really a big part of that. So.
Well, and the final thing I'll say is I just loved how he conducted that the recording room, and having artists come in and chart out what they wanted to do in the music so that they didn't waste any time, because they were paying, and he honored that they were paying. Right. Don't waste your time. Get it right the first time. Basically, I think what he was trying to do is get all your energy together so you have that burst, and then they got it because he was known for making records feel like it was a live performance, even though it was happening in the studio. Well, before we leave our music moment, let's talk a little bit about somebody we love to talk about in the first few months of the Culture Show, which is Flava Flav. What's happening there?
Oh, my God. You know what we've learned, I think, in the last few months? You never know with him.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time we talked about him, he was singing the national anthem, which is fine. That's not, if people don't know who he is, that's sort of not his genre, or hadn't been anyway. He's known for being a part of the landmark group, Public Enemy. So I'm just a little startled. Anyway, he stepped up to support the U.S. women's water polo team of all teams, and he says it's because he's a girl dad and he's really in favor of supporting women's sports. And what we know, unfortunately, about our Olympics, those teams have to raise money for themselves. That's a lot of money. It doesn't say quite how much money, but he said, I'll do the supporting. That's amazing.
It's fantastic, and I do love, because every once in a while, as far as I understand, this is something that played out on social media, and there's so much negativity in our lives around social media. It has been such a drag in so many ways for so many people. But this is one of those rare moments where it's like, you had, Maggie Steffens, who's, sort of the leader of the water polo team, had a platform where she could say, hey, this is a problem, and Flava Flav saw it and responded, and that's how it happened. So it is one of those kind of increasingly rare moments where it's like, nice job, social media. It's good for something.
And I want to point something out. You just don't know the breadth of people's interests. you know, and so you should not make an assumption, as I might have, about, where his interests may lie.
Especially when Flavor Flav is using his power for good. Sweet like that.
Right.
Well, coming up, remembering artist Frank Stella, the Malden native who launched his career by ushering in an era of cool minimalism. That's next on The Culture Show, live from our GBH studio at the Boston Public Library. Stay with us.
The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's arts and culture programming.
I'm Judy Ewell in for Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, pro-Palestinian students at MIT are protesting this morning's clear-out of the school's Gaza encampment. Meantime, Harvard is starting to hand down suspensions for students taking part in their encampment. Plus, Somerville Porch Fest is tomorrow. We'll have a preview. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Support for GBH comes from you. And Davis Malm, knowing the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com. That's DAVISMALM.com. Davis Malm, lean, agile, strategic.
And Boston Ballet School, dedicated to providing an inclusive environment by offering a range of programs to students of all ages, abilities, and household incomes. bostonballet.org/education.
I am honoring my nephew Louis David Brown.
In dealing with the pain of losing a loved one to violence, for Julia, there is hope.
So hope for me is a constant I believe in everybody's life. It keeps me grounded in my faith.
This week, GBH News lifts up mothers walking for peace.
It also allows me to get along better with other people.
Hear their stories at youtube.com/GBH News.
This is The Culture Show, live from the GBH studio at the Boston Public Library. I'm joined by co-hosts Callie Crossley and Edgar B. Herwick III. It's our Arts and Culture Week in Review, and now we're remembering the art world giant Frank Stella. Born in Malden, he made it big in Manhattan in every sense of the word, from his large-scale paintings to his stratospheric rise in the New York art scene. He died on Sunday at age 87, but some 70 years ago, his life was transformed by the Addison Gallery of American Art on the campus of Phillips Academy in Andover. I had the pleasure of spending an entire morning with him once there, about 5 years, or in 2017 it was, and he was just so generous and like a kid, actually, now that I think about it. That hadn't occurred to me until this very moment. Because he was so much in love with art and making art. His mother was a painter. His father was a house painter. So that's how he kind of came into this. And he told me he was a delinquency problem, as they called it then. So they sent him not to public school, but to Phillips Academy. And that is where he discovered the museum. And that is where he discovered a painting by Jackson Pollock, where he discovered a painting by Hans Hofmann that just changed the course of his career because he wanted to make that. And a story that I have not seen told since he died was that he stayed tied to that school and to that museum for his entire life. And they did several retrospectives, and at one point he even worked with them to create a campaign so that they could build up their endowment so that they could acquire works. And he also gifted them works from his own collection, works by Jasper Johns, Donald Judd, Agnes Martin, Mark Rothko. Wow. Because as he described it, he wanted to take the intimidation out of the heads of students. He thought, if I can put them in a museum and they can see this museum and they can see this art and then they can see how it's done by having art classes. And as he told me, the greatest thing about going to school there was that you had free paint. That meant you could waste it. That meant you could make mistakes and you could build, and he had that opportunity.
Well, I loved his vibrant work and colors, the geometric shapes. And what you can appreciate about him is it's very accessible, but there is a ton of technique. Oh, yeah. It seems simple. I mean, I think you have to say that because people sometimes look at it and they're like, oh, okay,
it's stripes.
Looks
They're
like
all straight. Yeah.
So, but no, it's a lot of technique, and then there's, of course, what he brings to the visual artistry of it. But I have to say that I came to Frank Stella through an African American artist, abstractionist, known as Alma Thomas, whose large collection is held at the Smithsonian. She's pretty not known by a lot of folks. She was ahead of him in age-wise. And so in my cultural shaping of art, I came through African-American artists, knew her. There was always a struggle with African-American artists about abstractionism because they felt like you should be doing representational work. If you're black, there's not enough of that out there. And then I thought, oh, I like this vibrancy, these shapes. And that then led me to the great Frank Stella and his work, because of course he was part of that great abstract expressionist movement. So, it's interesting how all these things connect and what brings you to somebody. Also appreciate him for taking political stances. One of his pieces was in support of the Attica Defense Fund. That was a rebellion at the Attica prison where 32 people died, including inmates and guards, because it was racial disparities in the prison. He did it again for South Africa too, when the Sharpeville massacre happened. So all those reasons, both technique, visual artistry, and for my money, political, on the right side, I like Frank Stella.
Wow. Yeah, goodness. 2 huge Frank Stella fans. No, I mean, I think, you talk about the technique. I think one of the things, if you watch interviews with him, read back to things that he said, there's this strain through his entire life where he talks about just how much he likes the work of the making. There's this craftsman's ethos kind of underneath all of this. He talks about, like, at the end of the day, he just enjoys, like, painting, like putting the paint onto the surface, like that there is something in that for him. And so when you talk, that is the kind of thing, that is the sort of approach that leads to, over time, having that kind of technique that you are talking about that is just like above and beyond, is like a different cut. And also, on that, well, go ahead, Jared. I could see you're ready to jump in there.
No. I was just going to say, as we near the end of this conversation, I want to play a little bit of the end of our interview, which is him basically looking back at his career. And again, this is from 2017 for a shoot that we did for Open Studio, and he puts his legacy into perspective.
My father didn't care that much about my being an artist. It didn't thrill him, but I mean, the idea, as long as I could do what I wanted, as long as I wasn't a burden on society. And that's the way I feel about the work. As long as it's not a burden, it's okay.
I mean, simply put. I mean, he knew who he was as an artist, but at the same time, he had complete conviction at a time coming out of the abstract expressionists when he was making these simple black paintings that everybody thought, what is this that is so simple, it's too simple to describe.
Well, and I also love one of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard, which, which he said, which is, what you see is what you see.
I love
that.
Like,
again, you talk about access, you talk about simplicity, and sure, it's great when somebody wants to break down what your work means and why, and he's basically like, what you see is what you see.
Yeah,
that's a great way to leave that segment. Well, next, we have talked a lot about artificial intelligence. We have derided artificial intelligence, but for once, well, a lot of people are finding really good value in artificial intelligence. We're still trying to find that in the art world anyway, because it's so fraught. However, we're seeing this with the way that AI is being employed to detect counterfeits. And so I'm going to bounce it over to you, Callie, because I think we're all in a disbelief, because this also involves shopping for art on eBay.
Yeah. Okay. 40 fake paintings right now, but the expert here, Dr. Karina Popovici, specialist in authenticating artwork, said they're all over the place. So they just applied the technique, and they could see by brush stroke and by palette, which I think is, when we're talking about technique, is really important.
Yeah.
So here the fakes are, I guess the brushstrokes are going in the wrong direction. And they weren't smart enough to get the right color palette. And she's like, no, this is not the real stuff. And I just thought to myself, oh my God, people were about to pay 599 pounds, 5,500 pounds for one of them, for the Renoir, the alleged Renoir. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Now, I don't buy expensive works of art.
Well,
but
at $5.99, maybe not.
Am I right that it's kind of weird to think that somebody would try to buy a Renoir
on eBay?
Well, I can tell you in the couple of decades I've now spent covering art, I don't know of anybody who's bought a Renoir or major masterpiece on eBay.
Yeah,
that
like
would
the
tell
idea.
you.
Yeah,
that would admit to
that would
you.
admit.
So part of me was like, do we need AI to tell us that the Monet being sold on eBay is fake? I don't know that we do, because who's going to sell a Monet on eBay?
Well, apparently it was selling. A lot.
So the reason I think this is really interesting is because, it seems foolish that somebody would buy something like that on eBay, because especially when you're spending six figures at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're talking, and this is the other clue, by the way, if you're buying a Renoir, it's not going to be six figures. we're talking about millions. So you want to see it in person. But I thought back to years ago where someone in the museum world, I will not identify this person, told me that about 20% of the art in museum collections is fake or a forgery.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is going to be a moment where we see this artificial intelligence employed by museums, just in the way that we're looking at the provenance questions and repatriation in permanent collections of museums and academies. What happens when you start to look at their holdings? And I think there will be some major, major discoveries there. And this is going to be a huge story.
You also, as I hear you saying that, I'm picturing, probably what will be years of legal wrangling as well. At some point when somebody says, hey, we think you need to go ahead and we're going to apply this tool to look over your entire collection. And if you are a high profile museum, you're going to be like, absolutely not. You are not going to touch this. That is going to play out probably over a course of years in court, sort of like the provenance thing has, right?
Exactly. In 2014, there was actually a show that was touring, and it was called Intent to Deceive, Fakes and Forgeries. I remember seeing it out at the Springfield Museums, and this is the curator, Julia Courtney, talking about how a fake Modigliani, I'm saying Modigliani because that's how Barbara Streisand keeps saying it in her book, which I'm now listening to. Most people say Modigliani. How that hung in a Miami museum unquestioned for more than 12 years.
Modigliani, because of his style, how he approached painting, was pretty easy to forge. So that's another thing the forgers look for is masters that they can replicate fairly easily without having to have without having to do too much homework. And Modigliani, because the shapes are pretty large, the lines and everything were easy for forgers to replicate. And this one is quite good. And when we actually unpacked it, we were all like, is that one of the fakes or the real one? So it even fooled us momentarily.
Which is pretty chilling. Of course, we do not wish this on the museum world at all.
No, of course.
But it's a reality, and now debate that would rage for years and years and years because of the analysis that would have to be involved. It seems artificial intelligence is getting there, that it can do this survey fairly quickly.
I keep thinking about, so someone comes to you and says, here's my collection full of 5 Renoirs and Monets, and does a museum do the impolite thing and say, well, we'll see about that? Or,
I mean,
right?
also, there's also the tricky thing of there is a percentage of flaw in the system we have now and will be in this, right? And there's the interesting question of, if you think about worldwide, and I don't know what the number is, but it's not going to be that many of people who are skilled enough in this field, who are learned enough in this field, that you would turn to for any given artist to say, is this true or not, right? They're presumably the only people who are going to be able to say when the machines have gotten there or have not, but they also have a horse in the race if the machine's getting there when they're not. So that, even just figuring out whether the machines are right or not in this case is going to be hard to do.
Well, it's certainly one we'll continue to talk about as it continues to surface.
Future follow-up Friday.
That's right. Well, coming up, how The Walking Dead has turned Worcester into a zombie wasteland. That's next on The Culture Show. Stay with us.
More and more states are offering free community college programs.
Nothing quite gets people's attention like free.
It was too good to be true. I mean, free money.
I'm finally getting my degree. I'm going for it.
But research shows their effects are limited.
The number one college affordability issue in this country is housing, and we're not talking about that.
the real cost of free on our podcast, College Uncovered. Listen today, wherever you get your podcasts.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, preserving the history of graphic communication from typewriters and presses to computers and copiers. Their expanded exhibit of rare and historic Bibles is now on view. More at museumofprinting.org. And Seasons 4, the outdoor living store on Mass Ave in Lexington, featuring over 100 styles of contemporary and traditional outdoor furniture, plus a wide selection of plants, statuary, and garden accessories. Seasons4.com.
Not all glaciers are melting away. Water evaporating from Pakistan's farmland is turning into snow in the mountains of Tajikistan, and it's causing some glaciers there to grow.
It's a total pain to walk around on, but they look a little bit exotic even to a glaciologist.
That story and more global news next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Welcome back to The Culture Show. If you're just tuning in, co-hosts Callie, Crossley, and Edgar B. Herwick III are here for our Arts and Culture Week in Review, which includes a holy trinity of entertainment. Tyler Perry, Devon Franklin, and Netflix are collaborating on a series of faith-based films. Callie, I'm going to turn this over to you right away because it sounds like this holy trinity has figured out that the Hallmark holiday movies do really well, so the subject matter might be translating all year round.
Absolutely. So this is an expansion of Tyler Perry's deal with Netflix. It'll be the first time that Devon Franklin, who is CEO and president of Franklin Films, will enter into the next Netflix arena. Devon Franklin, for people who are keeping up, is the ex-husband of Megan Good, who is now the girlfriend of Jonathan Majors, just so we get that straight.
Thank you, Callie.
But he's an author and producer of religious films, including Jesus Revolution, which in February 2023 had a budget of $15 million and came in at $54 million. So there is money here. The first film they're doing together is called R&B, kind of a clever, reference to the music, but actually it refers to Ruth and Boaz.
I love this.
Okay.
R&B.
And as we say in the Black Church, the text is based on Ruth 1 through 4 chapters in the Bible, in case you want to know where the story is based biblically. And they're going to make it a contemporary story, and I think they'll do very, very well.
They're going to do gangbusters.
Yeah.
I mean, this space is huge. It is enormous. Like, think about, one that I'm familiar with is Angel Studios, right? So that's been in the news a fair amount recently. They did that film Sound of Freedom, which seemed to sort of surprise everybody except for them by making something like $250 million worldwide. And they also do this television show, The Chosen, which has which is enormous. I mean, they're talking more than 100 million people around the world have watched at least some part of it. They released season 4 in theaters, and that made tens of millions of dollars, and then it's going to stream. Like, this is an enormous space. There is a huge audience for this.
And I think, very sincerely, I wasn't being glib, that the Hallmark movies have everything to do about this, because those are movies about family, and they're movies about community and partnership and coming together. And we have already talked on this show about how you don't need us to tell you how well they do at the holiday season, and now Valentine's Day in January and everything else they're building. So yeah, there seems to be a huge marketplace for this. Let's move out to Los Angeles now, where there is an very interesting story, I think, raging. And this is a couple owns a home next to the home where Marilyn Monroe died. And it was also the home that the only home that she bought of her own accord and lived in by herself, and it is where she died. And the couple who live next door own this home. They want to tear it down so that they can expand their property in Brentwood in Los Angeles. And of course, people are very upset because they consider this, without it being a registered historical landmark, a registered historical landmark. And they are suing the city of Los Angeles for skirting its own rules to quickly register it as a landmark. But I thought it was very fascinating, one, to see what we value and what should stay, and then how we have a conversation around that.
One of the issues, it's a tourist stop already, and people can't even see the house.
You can't
apparently,
see it from the street,
but
correct.
they want to see it, so obviously they would have the audience for it. And the question comes because, as the people who own the property say, that house has been repaired, so it's nothing like the original house.
The ship of Theseus
all right?
argument, right? It's the
we're
thought
back to that.
experiment, yeah.
So is this actually an historical landmark? Even if you want to argue for that, because now we've redone everything inside. So what are we landmarking?
In their lawsuit, they note that over 60 years since Marilyn Monroe passed away, there have been 14 owners. There have been numerous permitted remodels of the house, and they say there is not a single piece of the house that includes any physical evidence that Miss Monroe ever spent a day in the house. Not a piece of furniture, not a paint chip, not a carpet, nothing. So,
and I would answer that by saying,
yes,
this is also a NIMBY argument, because this is a very affluent enclave, and they bought this home, I think, for about $8-point-something million. Again, the home that they essentially just want to tear down. So they didn't mind spending $8 million for a piece of property, and they're already bothered by the fact that people come and want to take pictures, that they knock on their, I don't think they knock on their door, I think they knock on their gate.
Yes.
And ring the doorbell.
The gate that is the first of two or three gates to get to the door.
Before they cross the moat to get to the castle, to get into the inner sanctum.
The fire-breathing dragons.
To ask to take a picture of Marilyn Monroe's house. So I think they want this gone.
Right.
And this is the other interesting thing about this, is the same group that's behind, I think, Elvis Presley and other estates has offered to come in and buy the house and take it, move it somewhere else.
That's what I don't understand. That's to me a good.
I think that's a solution, and they're fine with it. They said, "Go ahead, cart it away. That's totally cool."
Yeah.
But
of course they said that.
Yeah,
get it away from the gate.
But
I think it solves a couple problems.
Yeah.
I think it does too.
Particularly
but
if every piece of it has been redone, you can still enjoy it for the place that she bought. With the framework and everything in it, but you don't have to have it on that street.
I feel like also, to be fair, whether the house is there or not, let's say they demolish it, right, and they make a tennis court or they make a pool or whatever. The fact that you cannot see it from the street anyway makes me feel like nobody's behavior is going to change. If you're on a bus tour, they're still going to stop in that spot, and they're going to say, it's right back there is where Marilyn Monroe died, and people are going to go like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
They're still going to have people go into the spot because it's the spot where it happened. So in some ways, tear it down, take it away, it doesn't matter, people are still going to be going there.
Well, I think that, but if you could actually see the house someplace else, that would lessen the interest in going to the spot. And this is different, let's point out, than you're not a Beatle where this is a studio where they made, records. She wasn't in there acting in her own studio. You know what I mean?
Well, we're all acting all the time.
You know what I mean,
Callie.
Hey.
So we're not playing this music to find out if Edgar and Kelly can say it backwards or sing it backwards. Although, can either of you sing it backwards? No, we're playing this because Mary Poppins is among the films that has a new rating in England, because unlike the United States, England routinely looks at its films that are coming into some sort of re-release or being streamed, or I was going to say DVD, but there are no more DVDs. Hello, 2004 Jared.
VHS.
But they go back and reclassify films that we would have considered G here. They have a different classification for ratings. But in this case, because Mary Poppins has some problematic racial language, they have advanced the rating for older aged children and ultimately adults, of course. But this is fascinating to realize how much they go back and look and reevaluate, something that we don't do here. And maybe should we?
Well, we have that advisory group of parents in place, but it's not like theirs where it actually, it takes public pressure for ours to take place. So our parents in that advisory group would have to say, no, then whip up a lot more people, and then there is usually a response. Whereas they say, okay, we got to change this, we're changing it, and that's it.
I mean, I think this is just fascinating as an exercise in taking a look at where we have come as a society, right? So, for that alone, I think this is fantastic that it's happening. Like, they note, and it's really interesting, like, right now where we're at versus where we were, say, 25 years ago, part of the surveying they did around this, people are totally fine with cannabis use in a way that they weren't maybe 30 years ago. But they're a little bit more concerned about things like bad language and casual violence, which when I think of movies that I was watching in the 80s, even ones that were PG, I mean, violence is everywhere. Bad language is pretty rife, So, the idea that we, of course, what we value, what we consider to be like not okay for kids, that changes over time. So the fact that they review this, revise this, I think is good. I think also the interesting thing to think about here is I think the stakes are a little different than they used to be. because when most of the movie watching was happening in theaters, that idea of like PG versus
Good
PG-13 versus R was going to really restrict who the audience was. Here, when most of the viewing is happening in the home, a parent can look at that and say, well, they say this. That's their recommendation.
But I don't have
But
to.
I don't have to follow
That's
it.
right.
I will let my 15-year-old watch this, but I won't let my 13, So the fact that most of the consuming is happening at home, I think the stakes aren't as high. So I think it might not be a bad idea for us in the United States to look at this and start doing it.
Now, what we do here is issue some warnings if we don't change the ratings, which I have to say I appreciate, because I think about the old rom-com Crossing Delancey, which is a great film with I just cringe every time I watch it, 2 instances of casual racism that just drive me crazy.
Yeah.
I would appreciate a warning about that.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. And the other thing that has been flagged, and as they've gone back and reassessed some of these movies, and by the way, we're talking about movies too, not just Mary Poppins, but Empire Strikes Back, Lord of the Rings, and in
Bruce
both
Lee.
of those cases, Bruce Lee, in all of those cases, it was definitely for violence. But our attitudes around sex and the depiction of sex has changed too, so that has also gotten films that may have had the equivalent of a PG rating here in the United States a higher rating.
Yeah.
And I'm scared of violence, so I want them to tell me.
Callie wants everything NC-17. You should not go to Worcester right now, then.
I understand.
But we'll get to Worcester in a moment. Fascinating, well, maybe not fascinating, that people want movie times to come down to a nice, clean, 92 minutes.
I
Are we
think
on
it's
board
great.
with this?
What's wrong with that? And I know they keep going back to the surveys that say people are voting with their feet because look at the top films and they were all 3 hours or more. Well, that's because that's all they had now. But now people are tired of that. And also, back to your point about streaming, if I know I can wait, and I am waiting, for some of those films, I will not go to the theater to see. That hurts the theater, right? Because I'm not going to sit there for 3 hours. But I know at home, I can enjoy it. So I'll just wait it out. I don't know that it helps anybody in the theater.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I don't know how much people know what they want in these kinds of surveys.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like,
Let me just quickly interject to say I was going to watch Killers of the Flower Moon at home and installments.
Yes.
I'm going to do it my way, thank you
Yes.
very much, Martin Scorsese, and I'm going to turn it into 3 nights, and I ended up watching the whole thing in one fell swoop because I thought it was that great.
It was really good.
But you were at home.
I was at home.
When you could go to the bathroom when you wanted.
Well, you have the go. What is it? The Go P. The Run P app.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Edgar. I have
No,
interrupted
it's
you.
okay.
But do you know about
tell
this?
me more about the Go P app.
There's the Run P app that has been devised for people to know exactly when you go to the theater, because of course you can pause at home to know exactly what moment you don't necessarily need to be caught up
they're
on.
like at the 84-minute mark. That's a good time to just dip out.
There's a little montage here, so you can just skip away to the theater
My
for
poor
a second.
friend who's a stand-in doesn't get seen. But go ahead, Ed.
Well, no, I mean, I honestly think I think generally you might be right that people sometimes movies are too long. I think but I don't know. I don't know that people know what they want. I know. People went and watched Barbie, which is kind of closer to 92 minutes, and they watched Oppenheimer in huge numbers, which is 3 hours. It's really dependent on the movie. When you say to somebody, how long do you think movies should be in general? I probably would also be 92 minutes. They're a little bit too long. But then, depending on the movie and how interested in it I'm going to go, no matter what the runtime is.
I predict that's going to change. I just don't think people are going to tolerate it. I just predict.
Okay. Yeah, we seem to move, especially when we see people want shorter songs too, and that has definitely trended down from 4 minutes to 3 minutes over the last about 20 years. All right, well, let's talk about why Callie can't go to Worcester right now.
Yes.
And that's because something I saw in person on Monday. This was hilarious. So we had a little GBH field trip to go and meet some fabulous arts organizations out in Worcester, like Music Worcester and Broadway Worcester, the Hanover Theater, and then we went to Worcester, to Arts Worcester, and we turned this corner, and I thought, oh, this is a area, this is a part of town that needs some help. Because we had just rounded this beautiful common, and it was really gorgeous, and this is run down Worcester. And somebody said, Jared, this is where they're filming The Walking Dead television show right now. So it had been decorated to look really bad and run down. I'm so glad they didn't.
I wish I was there in the car.
I was run down.
I want to be in the car with you when you're trying to keep it together. No, Worcester, it looks great. I mean, it could use a dust of paint, maybe another coat of paint, but beautiful city you have here.
It was just so suddenly shocking that it should have dawned on me that, of course, a television show would be shooting here. But this is great. We're seeing these take over parts of our town, and people are so excited because you could, clearly I was very excited. I was mesmerized, actually, to see the set decoration that happens and the kind of burned out cars. And again, being glad to not be casting it for how rundown I was looking that day. But this is, and Callie, we know you love the tax credit.
Well, yes, let me go to the barn and let my horse Hobby out of the barn.
Wait, Callie, you have feelings about the tax credit here in Massachusetts?
I do have big feelings about the tax credit.
Tell me more.
And I want to say that every time I argued about this before we had it, I would compare Massachusetts, what Massachusetts wasn't getting with what Georgia got. And I just would use this example because The Walking Dead original brought back the town of Senoia, Georgia, brought it back. So here's the quote from the economic status report. When they got there initially, a lot of empty buildings, and then all storefronts, 50 of them, are now completely filled as a result of their filming there and reaping the benefits of being able to employ all the folks in the area. 90% of the people working on the crew were from, ding, 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 Georgia. I say that's a win, and Hobby and I have made our point.
No, I mean, I wholly agree with you. And, Monique Joseph from Discover Central Massachusetts said, with this, the hotels are full, restaurants have more people in them, a lot of folks are coming out on the street. I mean, all of the local news coverage you could see, there were tons of people coming out to watch the filming. We heard at the top the little kid talking about it. I mean, this is good. It's good for Worcester. It's good for business, but it's also good for morale.
Hello.
And I think that's a really important thing here, right? That idea that, you can do this in Worcester. That's good.
Yes.
And because Worcester is looking so beautiful, they can make it look unbeautiful.
Yes.
So normally in this part of the show, we'd be hearing a lightning bolt to signal our lightning round. But Callie, why are we listening to Shirley Bassey?
This is the fabulous Shirley Bassey, who people who are fond of James Bond films will recognize. That's one of the songs that she sang for the Diamonds Are Forever franchise, but she also did Goldfinger as well. She's auctioning her diamond jewelry, so this is an appropriate song. She's giving it to charity, and apparently she really likes jewelry, and I guess she has a lot to give away, apparently, because 80 pieces of it will be exhibited at Sotheby's in Paris, and she's excited to do it because she said she's graduating from her lifelong passion from diamonds, which preceded the recording of Diamonds Are Forever.
Well,
so I love this about her. I love to. She's just a great singer too.
Your theme today is people do, the range of people's interests.
Yeah.
That's been your theme.
Yes.
For this entire
Thank
show.
you,
I love it.
Edgar, for pointing that out.
So as we continue our Shirley Bassey-themed lightning round, Edgar, what's the headline that caught your attention this week?
Well, mine was French bakers reclaiming the world record for the longest baguette. So this happened over the weekend, 461 feet. So I guess France once had the world record. About 5 years ago, Italy claimed the world record. They have now claimed it back. A dozen bakers got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they baked for about a dozen hours. And yeah, just to give you a sense, 461 feet, right? So that's 1.5 football fields. It's about 60% the height of the Prue, right?
Wow. Whoa.
Yeah. Right? It's about the size of the Custom House Tower.
That's a lot of butter.
That is a huge baguette. Yeah. So it's amazing. They shaped it. They did it the way you're supposed to do it, which is it can only have wheat flour, water, yeast, and salt. They kind of kneaded the whole thing out, right, with just those ingredients. It has to be 5 centimeters thick, the entire length. They got that. And then they had some sort of rolling oven underneath it to bake it, and they sort of turned it as they baked it, and it took something like 6 or 8 hours to bake. But they have done it. They have reclaimed the prize, the world record for the longest baguette. And then they cut it up, and folks who were there gathered to watch, got to eat it, and then they distributed it to people living on the street in this western suburb of Paris.
And if I'm not mistaken, isn't the baguette one of the foods of the heritage of the UNESCO heritage?
I think it is.
Yes.
So, coincidentally, my lightning round pick also has to do with very large food. There is a very large hot dog sitting in Times Square right now, only this one cannot be dismantled and shared because it is a piece of art. It's 60 feet long, and it's by the artists Jen Catrone and Paul Outlaw. They're a married couple, and they have created this hot dog because it is what they consider the most one of the most American of things. There was a raging debate about what condiment should be on it. It's mustard. That's it. But to celebrate it, they had a big wrestling match in Times Square where it is going to live for the next month.
Wrestling match to celebrate
because that is very American. And so they've had, I think, kind of the equivalent of Jell-O matches, and this is Times Square is a big old hot dog mess right now. It's pretty entertaining. I'm going down in a couple weeks. I can't wait to see it.
I want to see the selfie of you with the hot dog behind you.
I will promise it to you. Well, that is all for this edition of The Culture Show. You can catch up on all things arts and culture by way of our podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. We just have a quick second, Callie, but what's on Under the Radar?
We're doing the legacy of the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board coming up on May 17th. And Mother's Expressions. If your friends jump off the bridge, are you going to too?
Yep.
Brady Jarrett says, well, yes, I was thinking of doing that this afternoon. Yep. And Edgar, people can always catch you up on the Curiosity Desk.
Yeah, send me your questions, curiositydesk@wgbh.org.
All right, and tune in Monday for CRB's Ryan McCreath introducing us to the first BSO resident fellows. I'm Jared Bowen. Have an art and culture-filled weekend.
Where is she? Where is she? She's just about to close up the library.
The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's arts and culture programming.